Gary Brecka, it's an honor to have you here, man.
Dude, it's such an honor to be here. I can't even tell you, man.
Thank you.
This room is incredible. Like I said, it's full of like knives and guns and bullets, but the stories on the wall in here, it's like the energy in here is so good. You feel safe, like you feel protected.
Thank you.
You got an awesome spot, man.
Well, I appreciate that. There's a lot of history in here from a lot of our guests and from my prior careers but hey, I had a great time at your podcast too. I mean, we were joking downstairs. I've never been talked into getting in another man's bathtub. So
yeah, we became best friends that day, brother.
You're like, you got to get in here. It's hydrogenated water, and then I did it, and I'm sitting in there. I'm like, I can't believe I got in this fucking guy's bathtub, and sure as shit, like you told me, hey, if you have any aches, pains, it's all gonna go away, and I was like, yeah, right. And I'll be damned, man. Like, I didn't notice it right away. I noticed it the next morning.
Yeah, that's how long
usually it hurts the most. And no shoulder pain, no back pain, no knee pain. And I was like, okay, there's something to this.
Yeah.
And I took, like I told you, I took pictures of all the little devices that hydrogenate the water and started Googling around and got in touch with one of the companies.
Yeah.
And really started researching it, and so I'm gonna get all that stuff.
Dude, there's a website called hydrogenstudies.com. You can go there for free. It's all the consolidated research on hydrogen gas, using hydrogen to increase circulation, reduce inflammation, improve cognitive function. I mean, just go there and read it. There's animal and human studies on there. You can select out the animal studies and read the human clinical trials. I think it's the best kept secret in all of modern medicine. I mean, for athletic performance, I mean, you talk to like a John Jones or a Michael Chandler or some of these other athletes that I've worked with. Simple changes to their regimen, like having them bathe in hydrogen water, having them drink hydrogen water, and the reduction in pain level and the improvement in performance. Because of the reduction in inflammation. But most people that are in the kind of pain that you were in, knees, hips, shoulders, rotator cuff, low back, they're on corticosteroids, anti-inflammatories like a methotrexate or dexamethasone or prednisone, called Medrol dose packs, or they're taking pain medication. When you can actually take a warm bath in hydrogen gas and get the same effect. And it not only can last longer, it can potentially permanently reverse those conditions.
No kidding.
Oh yeah. I mean, after,
How did you, I don't want to get too far in the weeds because we're just starting out.
Okay, right.
I know we'll get more into this, but I don't want to forget this question. I mean, how the hell did you even, like, who comes up with, like, I mean, to me, this is like,
you asked like 4 questions.
To me, this is like psychedelics. Like,
yeah.
Who picked up the toad and rubbed it and ate the venom?
Yeah,
or
that's what I
smoked
want
the
to know.
venom. Who came up with that?
Right.
And so I want to know, like, how did you find hydrogen and its benefits?
My undergraduate degrees are in biology, and my postgraduate degrees are in human biology. So I've always been like crazy fascinated with the human body, and the more I study the human body, the more it's actually strengthened my faith, the more I believe that this was created by a divine being and it wasn't by accident. Like, you'll never convince me that 2 bacteria banged 1 billion years ago in a mud puddle and a lizard grew out and eventually we became Homo sapiens, and here we are, right? It doesn't even make sense evolutionarily because there's huge gaps in the fossil record, but we can talk about that later. But I've been fascinated by the human body, and I just believe so much more in what God gave us than what man makes us. And we become a society that's just become so dependent on chemicals, on synthetics, on pharmaceuticals. But when you really start to look at the research, which I'm fascinated by, like, my heroes are the scientists and the PhDs and the MDs and the researchers that are doing real work, studying real human beings to try to extend life and improve humanity. And what you find in most of this research is that we're just getting back to the basics, right? Sunlight, grounding, breath work, whole foods. So hydrogen's been, I mean, you're probably 60% hydrogen by weight. I mean, think of the percentage of water you are. And it's harmless to human beings. But this gas has anti-inflammatory process properties. It feeds a whole class of bacteria in our gut. It's improves circulation. It improves the absorption of our supplements, our nutrients. So, simple things like switching to drinking hydrogen water, like using a hydrogen water bottle or hydrogen tablets, bathing in hydrogen water, water that's been circulated through a machine that just adds hydrogen gas to the water. Game changers. Psoriasis, eczema, and don't take my word for it. Google around. Go to hydrogenstudies.com. Read the research for yourself. So, and this is one of those things I studied. After I really kind of got into the biohacking space because I was in the mortality space for decades. Predicting death, and as I've really started to go down the rabbit hole of what is truly extending life, like, how do we not just add years to our life? How do we add life to our years? Like, how do we not grow old and have to deal with all the consequences of aging? Well, the way you grow old and don't deal with the consequences of aging is you give the body the raw material it needs to do its job, right? And if you look at the broad research on this, like look at blue zones, for example, right, where you have these centenarians, people that live way beyond age 100. If you look at all of these blue zone areas of the world, you won't find continuity between diets. Right? So the dogmatic dieting is not the answer. So it's not vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, carnivore, keto, paleo, raw food. It's not these hyper dogmatic diets. It's whole food diets, right? You go to Sardinia and you see that it's one of the highest carbohydrate consumptions in the world. Well, how are they eating so many carbohydrates and living to 117 years old? Well, they make their bread from scratch. They make their pasta from scratch. These are all whole foods. You go to the Mediterranean and that flies in the face of modern medical recommendations. High amounts of fat, fatty fish, lots of oils, cheese. So, and then you go to, the French are screwing the whole thing up because they're smoking cigarettes and drinking wine and eating cheese. And some of those areas they're living forever. You go to Singapore, it's one of the highest meat consumptions in the world, one of the longest life expectancies in the world. So what's the commonality? The commonality is a whole food diet. In the United States, 67% of our diet is highly processed foods, which are not even foods, right? So I have an intellectual curiosity like a child. Like I'm absolutely fascinated by the human body. And I think that we are just barely beginning to understand what God's created. And I believe more in its ability to heal itself. I believe more in its ability to heal the environment around it than I do in the chemical industrial complex. And so we should be studying things like that: hydration, nutrition, hydrogen water, hydrogen gas. These are things that are readily available for us. So when I asked you that day if you had any aches or pains, and you were like, you got some time?
Yeah.
You're like everything hurts. I go, you're going to wake up tomorrow morning, nothing's going to hurt. I remember I could see the doubt in your face.
You're right. You're right. But, we'll get into that here in a bit. Everybody starts off with an introduction here.
Okay.
So, Gary Brecka, you're a human biologist, biohacker, and longevity expert with over 2 decades of experience in optimizing human performance and wellness. Previously, you were a mortality modeling expert in the insurance industry using medical records and demographic data from 360 million lives to predict lifespans with remarkable precision. Determined to transition from predicting lifespans to extending them, you embarked on a quest to optimize biomarkers and unlock the secrets to a longer, healthier life. Since this transition, you founded The Ultimate Human media platform and podcast where you share insight with celebrities, athletes, and scientists. You're a consultant to high-profile individuals, including CEOs, professional athletes, and celebrities such as Dana White, John Jones, and Stephen A. Smith, working with a team of experts to optimize mind, body, and spirit through science-backed methods. You're also a husband, a father, and probably most important of all, a man of faith and a Christian.
Amen.
And I know I'm missing a ton of other information.
Those are the highlights. Those are great.
But and one thing we do is we have a Patreon account. They're our top supporters. Many of them been with us since the beginning. And this whole thing kind of started off in my attic as a hobby. And and they have enabled me to grow this into what it is today.
amazing.
And so one of the things I offer them is I give them insight into who's coming on the podcast and offer them the opportunity to ask each and every guest a question.
Cool. So they knew that I was coming on, so these were specifically for me. All right,
This
right
is specifically for you. So this is from Jesse. What do you believe is the most underestimated factor in optimizing longevity and cognitive performance, and how can individuals practically integrate this into their daily routines?
So the most underutilized, overlooked area in all of human optimization, as we talked about a few minutes ago, is sleep. If you're not sleeping, you're not healing, you're not repairing, you're not eliminating waste, you're not toxifying. And so if I was to just pick one thing to optimize in my life to improve my cognitive performance, it would be sleep. And then followed by a second, third, and fourth, and I'll just lay those out for Jesse. The second would be movement. Again, going back to the discussion we had about the blue zones, one of the things that was common between all of the different blue zones, which was not diet, was mobility until later in life. So sitting is the new smoking. Sedentary lifestyle is now the leading cause of all-cause mortality.
Wow.
Yeah.
The leading cause?
It is the leading cause of all-cause mortality, meaning the greatest impact on the total number of deaths, what's called a modifiable risk factor, is sedentary lifestyle. I have a saying that aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. And most of us are aggressively pursuing comfort, and we are accelerating the rate at which we age. We have to stop thinking about stress as being a negative, right? Stress can be very good for us. If you don't actually load your bones, they will not strengthen. I don't care how much calcium you take. If you don't actually tear a muscle, it won't grow. If you don't challenge the immune system, it will weaken. The worst thing that came out of the pandemic, second maybe only to the vaccine itself, and we can talk about that, but was residential quarantining, masking, and social distancing. You took human beings out of contact with other human beings. So what happens when that occurs? The immune system weakens, right? The body's very efficient. If you stop using something, it will forget about it. Right? If you put a cast on your left arm, even if it's healthy, and you take it off in 6 weeks and you compare your left arm to your right arm, it will not only have lost muscle mass, but you will have lost a lot of tissue, right? Not just fat, muscle, tendon, ligament, bone will start to demineralize, because if you don't use it, you lose it. And so when we stopped challenging the immune system weakened. And then we woke up from the pandemic and everybody went back to quote unquote normal society. And now you start hearing about things like, well, we're on our 8th version of Omicron. We're monkeypox. Well, what the hell is monkeypox? Where did that come from? Well, it's always been around. It's just been so weak that it never manifested itself. But you globally weaken the immune system, and now you've got a weakened society without a strong immune system, and you're seeing the consequences of that. So, sleep first, and mobility second. And I don't care how deconditioned you are. You don't have to go out and do HIIT cardio and super Spartan races. You just need to move, and 3 15-minute walks a day. Apply stress to your body. I mean, the simple fact is, if you want to live a long time, lift heavy weight.
No kidding.
No question.
Lift heavy weight.
Lift heavy weight. Challenge your body. Tear your muscles. Apply stress to the body. Lift things that are heavy. Not so heavy that you hurt yourself. I don't believe in loading the spine. But if you can walk, that's excellent for you. It's probably the most underrated exercise in the world. But if you only had time to do cardiovascular training or weight training, I would do weight training, right?
Really?
Even if it's just body weight exercises, no question, because weight training beats cardiovascular training hands down. Muscle is not only our metabolic currency, but muscle is, in my opinion, and probably Gabrielle Lyon would share this with me too, is the largest organ in the body. Like, what does muscle do that we don't know that it does? We know it holds our skeleton up and it, moves our bones around, but makes us look good if we're physically fit. But the truth is that muscle is a sponge for glucose, right? I mean, it absorbs glucose. It uses the sugar in our bloodstream. If you want to lower your blood sugar, move your muscles. It also holds our skeletal system erect. The greatest risk to longevity in the elderly is frailty, right? That's why grip strength is actually directly tied to longevity.
No kidding.
When you look, no question. I mean, the elderly, what happens is, falls are enormous risk to the elderly and to the frail. Why do people start falling in older ages? Is it because they're losing their balance, or they're disoriented, or they trip more often? No, you probably had 6 incidences in the last month where you would have fallen if you didn't have the grip strength to stop yourself, right? But you can hold on to your door handle, you can grab the railing of a stair, you can brace yourself on the wall, and you just moved on about your day. When you're frail and you can't stop the momentum of a fall, then you end up with a catastrophic injury. And then without loading our spine, without loading our skeletal system, it begins to weaken. You know, how many of us know, we used to call it the triad of death in the mortality space when I was doing mortality research. You know, someone would break their hip and within 36 months, they were dead. Why would a hip fracture lead to early death? Because the majority of hip fractures in the elderly are not elderly people falling and breaking their hip. The majority of hip fractures in the elderly are the hip breaking and then they fall. And there's a difference between the fracture causing the fall and the fall causing the fracture. So when your skeletal system is so weak that it can not only support its own weight, grandma's standing at the kitchen sink doing dishes and her femoral head cracks and she falls and they go, oh my gosh, grandma fell and broke her hip. No, she didn't. Her hip broke and then she fell. And so we have pursued comfort so aggressively that we become so frail that we can't even essentially protect ourselves. So those would be my big recommendations would be start a process. I mean, Sardinia, for example, in the blue zones in Sardinia, their life expectancy was directly related to the grade of the slope they walked up. The steeper the slope, the longer the life expectancy.
No kidding.
Yeah, you got 93, 97-year-old men and women walking up 30+ degree slopes, 10 blocks to go to church, 4 blocks over to the market, 4 blocks back home. There's no such thing as elevators there. There's no such thing as assisted care living facilities. Assisted care living is mom and dad move back in with the kids until they pass away. And what does that do? It gives mom and dad a sense of purpose. Even if their only purpose is to go out to the garden and get vegetables for that night's dinner, right? Or they make, dad's 105 years old and he's still making belts for the community. They have a purpose. They have actually some meaning. And so sense of purpose, mobility into later in life, and whole foods. That's what you get from the blue zones. We should adopt those philosophies here. Not be dogmatic about dieting, right? But eat whole foods and move our ass, right? I mean, we regulate everything, our air temperature, our lighting, our temperature in our car, the temperature in our office, the temperature in our home. If you want to make your house the surface of the sun at 1 o'clock in the morning, you can just turn all the lights on, right? I mean, it's very unnatural. We've gotten so far out of just the natural circadian rhythm of life. So when Jesse or Jessica was asking about, my tips for living a long life and improving your cognitive function, it would absolutely be mobility, whole foods, focus on sleep.
Interesting. So no more escalators.
Dude, I have a thing, man. My team, like when we travel, like you get on an escalator, you better have a shit ton of baggage that you can't carry up the steps, right?
I can't stand it, man. I won't take them just because everybody gets on and they just stand there and the phone comes out and they look at it.
Yeah, it's called a mobile walkway.
Flight, But
they just get on it, stand.
Yep.
Get on the escalator, stand.
Literally everybody.
You stand.
Everybody does.
Yeah. We do like intermittent standing. It's crazy.
Intermittent standing. Even though I'm excited for the new administration, there's a lot of tension in the world. Russia, Ukraine, the border, inflation. Who knows what could happen next? Me, I'm not waiting around to find out, and I don't think you should either. Look, it's simple. I want you to go to ShawnLikesGold.com. You'll learn about my partners over at Goldco. They're a great precious metals company that I trust. They're one of the top-rated gold companies in the industry with impeccable customer service, and they support the show. And for my listeners, they're going to give you a free gold and silver kit where you can learn about how precious metals could help you protect your money. You could also get up to a 10% instant match in bonus silver on qualified orders. That extra 10% is a great way to get started. Plus, it helps support the show. All you need to do is go to ShawnLikesGold.com. That's ShawnLikesGold.com. Make sure you do everything in your power to help protect what's yours. Performance may vary. Consult with your tax attorney or financial professional before making an investment decision. It's a new year, and if you need to hire for your business and want an easier way to find qualified candidates, head to ZipRecruiter. And right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/SRS. ZipRecruiter is the top-rated hiring site according to G2. How fast does ZipRecruiter's smart technology start showing your job to qualified candidates? Immediately. ZipRecruiter's powerful matching technology works fast to find top talent, so you don't waste your time or money. You can invite top candidates for your job to apply and even encourage them to apply sooner. Here's to a new year of hiring made easier with ZipRecruiter. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. See for yourself. Try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/SRS. That's ZipRecruiter.com/SRS. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Well, Gary, I want to get into your work with the insurance companies and kind of what that was. What kind of insurance was it? Was it life insurance,
Life insurance,
health insurance?
and annuities. You wouldn't believe the number of financial services instruments that are actually based on mortality. People don't realize how many tens of billions of dollars a year of financial services products are sold and put in force based on when people are going to die. I mean, life insurance being the obvious, reverse mortgages, annuities. So an annuity, for example, is you write a check to the insurance company. They guarantee you an income stream for life. Well, what do you think they use to guarantee how long they're going to pay you? Your mortality. When a life insurance company puts 10 million or 25 million or 50 million or $1 million worth of risk on your life, only one thing matters. How many more months do you have left on Earth? So insurance companies don't care where you are on an actuarial curve, right? Everybody listening to this podcast is on one. If you're a 34-year-old male, you have a life expectancy of X. If you're a 51-year-old female, you have a life expectancy of Y. You go apply for a jumbo life insurance policy, which is the area that I worked in, above $10 million in face value. If you ask the insurance company to put $10 million or 20 or 30 million, 50 million of risk on your life, you better believe that there's somebody in the back room. They're not putting you on an actuarial curve. They're looking at your specific mortality, telling the insurance company how many more months does this person have left on Earth. And I get a lot of flack for this because people say, well, if you could predict, we were talking about this earlier, if you could predict mortality to the month, you would have won a Nobel Prize or you'd be Jesus. But I promise you I'm not Jesus and I never won a Nobel Prize. But it is some of the most accurate science in the world. If you want to know how accurate insurance companies are at predicting death, just look at what happened during the 2008-2009 financial services crisis. We had 364 banks fail. Not one life insurance company failed. Shit, not one. Right? They're some of the most solvent institutions in the world, and yet they will take tens of millions of dollars worth of risk on one variable. How many more months do you have left on Earth? If you die early, they lose. So they're very accurate at predicting life expectancy. Well, what do they use to predict life expectancy? I'll tell you the 3 things they don't use, which is modern medicine hates this. They don't use randomized clinical trials. They don't take Big Pharma's trial that says that LDL cholesterol leads to cardiovascular disease, which leads to early death, and so you need to be on this pharmaceutical. They use big data, hundreds of millions of lives, and they know the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for 370 plus million lives. And so when you know day, date, time, location, and cause of death, you can triangulate that back into the record. And you can say, okay, what are the sequence of events that lead to early death? So if I got 10 years of medical records on you and 10 years of demographic data, we could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month. And based on these life expectancies, institutions would take hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in risk, and they were very, very accurate. And so when you look at that data, the epiphany that I had was, I sort of woke up one day and was like, what am I doing? I'm reading medical records for a living. I've read hundreds, if not thousands of times more medical records than a practicing physician because they're practicing medicine. They're not reading records. I just read records. I'm not a physician for the record. I'm not licensed to practice medicine. I'm a human biologist. But I just read medical records for a living, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of medical records. And we would put these into a model and we would use it to predict the onset of death. And what became glaringly apparent was that the reason why the majority of people are not living longer, healthier, happier, more fulfilling lives are because of something called modifiable risk factors. So had it not been against the law for me to pick up the phone and contact the patient or contact the client, I could have on average added 7 years to those people's lives.
No kidding.
No question. Because we have lost faith in humanity and mankind and the body's ability to heal itself and the expression of deficiency in the body. So for example, if you were to pull the blood of all of your listeners, you'd find that there's hundreds of vitamins in their bloodstream. Their body can only make one. When God made us, he made us with the ability to make one vitamin, a single vitamin. So how important do you think this vitamin is to human health if it's the only one that we make on our own? Okay, this vitamin is called vitamin D3, called a calciferol. We make it from sunlight and cholesterol. You don't need to eat, you don't need to drink, you don't need to do anything. You need to expose your skin to sunlight and have cholesterol in your bloodstream to make vitamin D3. So 50% of the world's population is clinically deficient in this nutrient. 85% of the African American and Latino populations, darker complected populations, clinically deficient in this nutrient. So what happens when you're missing the most important, in my opinion, the most important single raw material in the human body? Well, vitamin D3 deficiency was the second leading cause of morbidity in COVID. Vitamin D3 deficiency is highly linked to brittle bone disease, osteopenia, osteoporosis, autoimmune conditions, also compromised immune systems. And so here's a nutrient that we make on our own. It's very easy to supplement with, by the way. And deficiency in this nutrient has this all of these expressions of these different diseases. So, your listeners might not be aware that the number one killer of human beings in the world is cardiovascular disease. The number two killer of human beings in the world is cancer. The number three killer of human beings in the world is modern medicine. It's medical error.
Number three?
The number three killer of human beings. The third leading cause of death is medical error. If you want to look up the 2016 study, it was done by Harvard University. Just Google 2016 Harvard University study on medical error. It was repeated by Johns Hopkins, I think, in 2019, and it got worse, so they published the Harvard study. So what does this mean? It means that medical error is the third leading cause of death. And now, when you realize medical error is the third leading cause of death, it's like, wow, that's kind of shocking. Until you realize that it's the third leading cause of death in the industry designed to prevent death. Like if you translated that to any other industry, it'd be laughable, right? I mean, if you sold home security systems, but you were the third leading cause of home invasion, you'd probably be out of business, right? Yeah. I mean, if you were a roofer, but you were the third leading cause of roof collapse, it'd be laughable if we applied that to any other industry. But this is where we go to get our advice on how to be healthy, optimally healthy, when we should be going there for catastrophic medicine. We're very good at heart attacks, hemorrhages, gunshot wounds, knife wounds, broken arms. We're very, very good at crisis medicine. What we're not good at is keeping people healthy. And so just to take this one step further. So you have this nutrient, vitamin D3, which we get from sunlight and cholesterol. We've been totally taught to fear the sun, right? The truth is most of us are not getting enough sun. It's not we're getting too much sun. We're not getting enough sun. We've been taught to just absolutely shield ourselves from the sun. And what's interesting, if you actually overlay the incidence of skin cancer with the parabolic rise in the use of sunscreens, these are superimposable, right? Since 2018, 23 brands of sunscreen have been pulled from the market for directly causing skin cancer. And yet we've been taught to fear the sun. And so we don't get sunlight, our D3 drops. Like we've developed sayings around this, like, don't go outside in the wintertime, you'll catch a cold. Okay, there's no such thing as catching a cold. First of all, that's a fallacy. Going outside in the wintertime is substantially safer than going outside in the summertime because there's a lot more pathogens in warm weather than there are in cold weather. There's not bacteria lying around the surface of a 15-degree handrail waiting to infect you. The reason why we associate cold with getting sick is because when it's cold, we layer up. When we layer up, we get less sun. When we get less sun, our D3 drops. When our D3 drops, our immune system's compromised. So,
wow.
Yeah. So
wow.
It's just the opposite. It's the antithetical way that we've been taught to think.
What is this? How is this? Is this through marketing? Is that how we've been taught?
If you think about it, yeah, absolutely, it's through marketing. A lot of this is fear-based marketing. I don't want to get cancer, so I'm going to put bisphenols and phthalates and all kinds of things on my skin to stop the sun from reaching my skin. But you got to realize your skin is not a barrier; it's a gateway. So if you put it on your skin, you should be prepared to eat it. I wouldn't put anything on your skin that you wouldn't eat. And so when you think about the amount of disruption that comes from chemicals just being on the skin, entering the bloodstream, it wreaks all kinds of havoc. But what I saw when I was at the insurance agent, when I was in the mortality space, was in the record, you would see this clinical deficiency in vitamin D3, long-term deficiencies in vitamin D3. You could see it in the blood. Eventually, these people will present with rheumatoid arthritis-like symptoms. So what happens when you have a clinical deficiency in vitamin D3 for a prolonged period of time? Well, your immune system's compromised, first of all. The second thing that happens is you start to develop rheumatoid arthritis-like symptoms. The soles of your feet are sore and achy when you get out of bed in the morning to walk to the bathroom and take your first pee. You wake up in the morning, you feel like you had a really hard workout the night before when you haven't. Your knees, your hips, your shoulders, and your low back start to ache constantly. Eventually, it's hard to even make a really tight fist. Well, if you go to the wrong primary care physician, you describe those symptoms, they're going to tell you that you have rheumatoid arthritis. Do you know how many thousands of times I saw diagnoses of chronic condition like rheumatoid arthritis with no testing, no RA factors, no blood work, no SED rates? They would just say, you know what, Shawn, based on what you're telling me, you got rheumatoid arthritis. But don't worry, I'm going to put you on a corticosteroid. Okay, and then a corticosteroid, not steroid like muscles, a steroid for anti-inflammation like methotrexate or prednisone or methylprednisone. So now they put you on a steroid. The sad thing is for a period of time it works. Pain goes away, right? But steroids, first they're anti-inflammatory, but then they eat your joint like a termite. So it was so predictable that we knew that 6 years and 1 day after you started taking corticosteroids, you were going to have a joint replacement. And as soon as you had a joint replacement, you were going to reduce your ability to be mobile. As your mobility reduced, I could bring in all the diseases that exacerbate with reduced mobility. So now you had a vitamin D3 deficiency, got diagnosed with a disease you didn't have, put on a medication that wasn't required. 6 years later, forced a surgery that was unnecessary. That surgery reduced your mobility. As your mobility dropped, all the diseases came from your future to your present. You succumbed to a disease you never would have had because of a condition that you did not have, because of a medication that wasn't required, because of a simple nutrient deficiency.
Holy shit. So it's a snowball effect.
It's a snowball effect. But had I been able to pick up the phone, I get goosebumps even just telling you the stories, but because I think about it a lot. You know, had I been able to just pick up the phone and call these people and say, hey, listen, I'm not a doctor. Stop taking the methotrexate. Take 5,000 IUs of vitamin D3 with 80 micrograms of K2. Wait 3 months. Like, you know, then I could have a demonstrative impact on these people's lives. And so at some point, I just abruptly resigned from that industry. And I went home and told my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, I said, hey, I quit my job today, first of all. Thought I'd throw that at you. And I want to start a wellness clinic. I want to start a functional medicine clinic. She's like, you're not even a doctor. I was like, I'll find a doctor. And I did. Dr. Campermore, if you're listening, in Naples, Florida. He was one of the longest practicing anesthesiologists in Naples, Florida. And thank God for him, because he took a bet on me.
You know, if you don't mind, I'd like to divulge a little bit more into that because
Sure.
And we don't have to. I don't, you know, if you don't want to. But when I went on your podcast, you kind of told me the story a little bit more in depth. And I just want to say, like, it's very commendable and very noble of you how you left the insurance company.
Yeah.
And it sounded like it came down to a single patient, or maybe not a patient, but a one of the insurance customers. And so could you go into that a little bit more in depth?
Yeah. It's a tough one. But I was working on a case on a woman that was getting she had a large life insurance policy. She was actually selling. And she was transferring care between cardiologists. She was in the Midwest, and she was transferring to her winter home in Miami. And there's something called the Medical Information Bureau, and it's meant to catch like people that are pain medication surfing, narcotic surfing, or contraindications between meds. And the physician in Miami had put a script into the record that was a contraindication, meaning it was going to cause a high chance of causing a thrombolytic event, like a blood clot, a stroke, an embolism. And so I saw what she was taking. I saw what was waiting for her. And so I went into human resources, at the time and said, hey, I'm contacting this lady, right? I mean, we were not allowed to have any contact with the client, the applicant, the treating physician for the right reason. Again, I'm not licensed to practice medicine. So, having me call up and try to make an opinion on their medical care isn't right. But they were very, not only disinterested in having me contact that patient, I got threatened with prosecution. And so I knew at some point that this lady was going to get on a plane, go to her winter home. She was going to pick up that script, and she was going to have a thrombolytic event. So she was going to either have an embolism, blood clot, stroke, some kind of clotting event. And just the callousness with which I was told not to contact the patient and that I would be potentially prosecuted if I did. That was the final straw for me. That's really what forced my resignation. And I think about that lady a lot. I still to this day don't know what happened. I don't know if the physician caught it, but I also think about how many years I gave to that industry, and I was just so myopic. I was very selfish. I was just concerned about trying to be wealthy, and I was doing very well in that industry, so I had kind of a lot of accolades and things, but I was doing nothing in service of humanity. I had real knowledge on how to help people live healthier, happier, longer, more fulfilling lives. And I was just watching these train wrecks happen. It was like sitting behind a thick glass wall and just watching blind people walk into traffic. And when you read a certain number of medical records, you see these patterns start to emerge, and you're like, you could just start the record and you just knew exactly where the record was going to end. Like, oh, here comes the joint replacement. Oh, here comes, they're on the beta blocker. There comes the blood thinner. And the next thing to follow is the antidepressant because of the cholesterol medication. And now they're on an SSRI, and there comes the suicidal ideations. There comes the therapy. Like you could just map out the consequences in the medical record and say, gosh, this person had a little bit of elevated level of LDL cholesterol. Then they got put on a statin. It started to drive the cholesterol down. Then the brain fog and the short-term recall and the cognitive function starts to decline. And then the depression starts to creep in. And now they're on an SSRI. And as they become less mobile, their hematocrit, viscosity of their blood seem to go up. So then they're on the blood thinner, and the pressure starts to rise. And then they're on a beta blocker, an ACE inhibitor, or calcium channel blocker. And the next thing you know, it's just this massive chemical soup, right? Just trying to regulate all of these processes in the body, trying to regulate blood pressure over here and mood over here and blood viscosity over here and pain over here and cholesterol over here. And nobody's ever really studied the consequences of putting all of this into the same biome. We study things in isolation in medicine very often. Randomized clinical trials are isolated trials where we're only looking at one medication for one outcome in a control group, but we're actually not studying human beings or their cells and the environment that they exist, right? These cells exist in communities. You can't take a cell out of the body, put it in a petri dish, look how it behaves in a lab, and then assume when you put that cell back into the body that it's going to behave the same way. Nothing is further from the truth. And this is why we run in these 20-year cycles where we do a randomized clinical trial, drug gets approved, we push the drug on the market. Then 10 years later, we realize we made a really grave mistake. We got hundreds of thousands of people dying from this drug. We got hundreds of thousands of people now addicted to this drug, and now they can't get the drug. So now they're on the street. Like they say that opiates is a rich man's addiction and heroin's a poor man's addiction. And it's very true. You know, a lot of people didn't wake up one day and decide they were going to be an addict. They woke up one day and wanted to feel normal. And in the search for normalcy, they developed an addiction. And now they're running from a low. They're not running towards a high. So and so I saw these cycles and I was like, this shit is all wrong. I mean, you know, if I could have just picked up the phone and called half of these people and said, you need to stop taking this, in my opinion, stop taking the corticosteroid, get off the statin, because we use big data. So there was a lot of popularity of marginally increased levels, for example, of LDL cholesterol, which has been vilified, in my opinion, wrongfully. You know, and if you had high levels of LDL cholesterol, you were automatically had this crazy high risk for cardiovascular disease. So we would smash the cholesterol down in these really low numbers. We'd put you on all kinds of cholesterol mitigating drugs. And what we would see, not infrequently, in nearly every case, is you would see the consequences of not having this compound in the body. Cholesterol, by the way, is made by the liver. 85% of the cholesterol in your blood is manufactured by the liver. It doesn't come from diet. Only 15% of the cholesterol in your blood comes from diet. And most people don't realize that cholesterol is not a fuel source. It's a construction material. We use it to build every cell wall, every cell membrane. We use it to make hormones. We use it to make vitamin D3. You make cholecalciferol from cholesterol. So when you drive this down, the majority of the brain is cholesterol. All of a sudden, you start to see cognitive impairment. You see erectile dysfunction. You see hormone dysregulation. Why? Because you make hormones from cholesterol. And yet, we're linking it to cardiovascular disease, but there's no clinical evidence that it just seems to jump out of the bloodstream and magically stick to the arterial wall or magically pass through the arterial wall. It has to be called to that location. There has to be an inflammatory cycle. There has to be something that initiates its arrival. You know, cholesterol is kind of like the fireman. It shows up when there's a fire. It gets called to the site of inflammation. It didn't start the fire. So the notion that if we had fewer firemen, we'd have less fires doesn't make any sense. But that's what modern medicine would want you to believe, that if we had fewer firemen, we'd have fewer fires. That's not true. And so we found no correlation between elevated levels of LDL cholesterol and cardiovascular disease or early death. In fact, we found the opposite. We found in most of the centenarians, in fact, all the centenarian death claims that I processed, people living above age 100, without an exception in my career, they had clinically elevated levels of LDL cholesterol at the time of their death, because many of them died in nursing homes and we had blood work on them. So if people that had the highest cholesterol were living the longest, then why were we trying to push this compound down? Well, I mean, cholesterol medication is one of the most profitable pharmaceutical compounds, until the vaccine came along, one of the most profitable compounds to ever hit modern humanity. I mean, in the 50s and 60s, the cholesterol levels were in the 260s. That was the optimal level of cholesterol. So if you were to ask me what's the optimal level of cholesterol today, 260. But what do lab results say? Well, LDL cholesterol shouldn't be above 99. As soon as it gets above 99, you get to 120, you're on a statin. And now you're taking away one of the compounds that not only forms the brain, but reduces inflammation, which repairs damage in the body, which makes hormones, which makes cell walls and cell membranes and vitamin D3, and you're getting rid of it. Well, there's consequences to that. Right? So this is what I mean. It's like we've gotten so far away. We've created an industrial complex that is built on a profit center of disease. You know, type 2 diabetes in the United States is a $110 billion industry. $110 billion in profit a year from type 2 diabetes. So just imagine whether or not there's a meeting going on in some boardroom to put that industry out of business. There's not. Right? We want people to suffer over a prolonged period of time. We don't want you to die early. We want you to suffer for a prolonged period of time. And if you look at how pharmaceuticals have crept into the hamster wheel of society at younger and younger and younger and younger ages now, we start on the hamster wheel of pharma. You come out of the womb and you have barely even taken your first breath. You got erythromycin in your eyes and you're being given a hepatitis B vaccine. Well, what's hepatitis B? It's a sexually transmitted virus, or it's transmitted through intravenous drug usage. What are the chances that a newborn fetus is going to be having sexual intercourse or using IV drugs? None. What are the incidences of hepatitis B in prepubescent teens all the way down to infants, 0. Unless the mother had it at birth, which because you can tissue type them. And I could give you hundreds of examples like this, but we have just bathed our cellular biology in a toxic soup. We are on the pharma bandwagon from the time we come out of the womb. I think there's 79 vaccines on the vaccine schedule now. This time in the 50s, there was 8. We have pandemics of autism, pandemics of chronic disease. We spend $4.5 trillion a year on healthcare, and we are the sickest, fattest, most disease-ridden nation on the planet. We lead the world not only in medical care spending, but we lead the world in 6 major categories: infant mortality, maternal mortality, the lowest life expectancy at birth of any other civilized nation, the next 60 civilized nations. We lead the world in morbid obesity, type 2 diabetes, and multiple chronic disease in a single biome. And yet we spend $4.5 trillion a year on healthcare. 77%. By the way, I will put the links to any of these quotes that I say, because we're going to get hammered for this by the media. If I make any one of these statements, I'm going to give you the links. So you can put it in the show notes.
Thank you.
Right from the Department of Defense, 77% of our military-age men and women cannot pass a simple physical exam to enter the military. 77%. That means 3/4 of our military-age population cannot serve in the military because they are not physically capable of entering military service and passing a basic exam.
Wow.
Why is that? I mean, how did we get so deconditioned? Why is it that the majority of teenagers can't do a 30-second dead hang, can't sit on a 1-foot-high box jump and stand up, can't run a mile in less than 9 minutes, can't do 20 unbroken push-ups or 20 unbroken sit-ups? It's because we are aggressively pursuing, comfort. So I don't know how I got down this tangent. I got on a real soapbox there, and I apologize. But what's happening now is like, and I think this happens in all areas of society, is like the pendulum just swings too far. And I think people say, enough, right? I mean, pretty soon, when we don't have any men and women that are physically capable of entering the military, or when we realize that we have the highest rate of childhood cancer in recorded history, when we realize that for the first time in recorded history, our life expectancy is going backwards, then somebody will take a hold of our public policy and begin to implement the kind of simple changes that could save us from this pathway that we're on right now, which includes a lot of things like getting rid of the corruption in our research institutions. I mean, 93% of the FDA's board has conflicts of interest with big pharma and big food. When you look at our nutritional research, 74% of this is funded by food and pharma, which is why Lucky Charms is shown to be more nutritious than grass-fed steak. It's why they say that highly processed foods, we don't have enough data to say whether or not highly processed foods are having a negative effect on society. So we highly process our foods, and yet we have an industry that is profiting trillions of dollars on the backs of the pandemic of disease that this food supply creates. And so by getting us back to the basics, we can circumvent that entire system.
Going online unprotected is like leaving your door unlocked when you leave the house. Maybe you trust some of your neighbors, but what about random strangers? Do you trust all of them too? Do you really want to take that chance? With ExpressVPN, you can stay safe online without having to trust anyone. Every time you connect to an unencrypted network, in a coffee shop, at the airport, really in any public place, your online data is not secure. Anyone on that same network can gain access to and steal your personal data. ExpressVPN changes that as easily as opening up the app and clicking one button to get protected. I've been on the road speaking with all kinds of people, from health gurus to world leaders, and data security is extremely important to me. ExpressVPN helps defeat hacking attempts by creating a secure, encrypted tunnel between my device and the open internet, so you don't have to worry about who else has access to your information. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/SRS. That's expressvpn.com/SRS, and you can get an extra 4 months free. expressvpn.com/SRS. This episode is sponsored by Roka. Roka is a performance eyewear brand for people who want to invest in themselves. Roka manufactures premium sunglasses, prescription eyeglasses, and readers, and cuts all of their lenses here in the U.S. at their headquarters in Austin, Texas. Roka recently partnered with one of my favorite guests, Dr. Andrew Huberman, to launch a new line of glasses called the Wind Down Collection. Guys, I've tried these. You know I have problems sleeping. I absolutely love these frames and lenses. They're available with and without prescription and have a proprietary red lens that helps filter out short wavelength light. Short wavelength light is in pretty much all artificial light, and it's terrible for your sleep. Roka let me try a pair of these things, and I can feel the difference whenever I wear them. I wear them in the evening after the sun goes down. I pretty much start it at dinner, and I wear it until bed. And let me tell you, these things work. With so many options in eyewear and wellness products out there, it's a relief to know the glasses I'm wearing help two things I really care about: my vision and my sleep. And as a business owner with all the decisions I already need to make every day, wearing a pair of Roka's glasses is one of the best ones I've made. Check them out for yourself at Roka.com and use code SRS for 20% off site-wide at checkout. That's Roka.com with code SRS. You know, I mean, I'm going to plug something.
Okay.
And I don't get paid for this. We had a conversation downstairs about plugs and comments and all that kind of stuff. And I just want to say, you know, what you told me. I mean, for anybody listening, Gary is one of the most authentic people I've ever met. And
thank you, man.
You stand behind every product. And we had a long conversation about that downstairs. And you know, I've been talking about this Yuka app. I think I brought it up on your podcast, and I brought it up on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I actually reached out to try to partner with them, and they don't have the funding to do it. But I don't fucking care, man, because whatever they're doing, you know, it's helping re-educate the population about, you know, hey, this is all the shit that's in your food. All you have to do is download that app. It's free. You scan a barcode, and it first thing it tells you is these are all the additives. This is what it does this is what it does. And, you know, and then all the other health stuff is below the additives. But me and my wife redid our entire kitchen on that. And it's just a great way to educate the population. And I know that's, I mean, that's that's what you do. And you do want to help people. And so I want to plug that. But, but moving on, you know, we were just talking about vaccinations in kids, and this is something that my wife and I go round and round about. We don't know what to do. We don't know who to trust. Ever since COVID, I have zero confidence in anything that the U.S. government tells me. Nothing. In fact, it's so bad, and I know this isn't the right thing to do, but it's almost like I do the opposite. It's like they say do this, fuck that, I'm doing this. You know, like they're obviously lying, I'm not doing it. You know, oh, you say that's good for me, it's probably fucking horrible.
Right.
And you know, but with that being said, it's atrocious. Nobody really knows where to find truth in a variety of topics and genres, but at the forefront of all of this in my family, because I have two little kids, and we don't know what to do with the vaccinations. And
I'll send you a good book on the good vaccine schedule.
I mean, are there any good vaccines?
Yes. So first of all, you know, we have to take a step back for a second. And the way before COVID, the way we defined vaccines was, you know, these were designed to prevent the infection and the spread, which initially we were told it would prevent the infection. Then we were like, oh, people are still getting COVID. And then we were told it would prevent the spread. And we were like, oh, well, they're still spreading COVID. And then we said it would reduce the severity of symptoms. And then we actually found out that it didn't. And so we used to make vaccines. So first of all, vaccine used to prevent the infection and prevent the spread. If you get the polio vaccine, you not only don't catch polio, you also don't spread polio, right? So we redefined that to mean that it prevented the severity of symptoms from that virus. The other thing we used to do is we used to make vaccines, and in some cases we still do, out of what's called attenuated viruses. A virus is not a living thing. It's an envelope, right? Like a nucleocapsid protein. So imagine an envelope, and it has DNA inside of it. Okay, but it's not living. What it needs to do is it needs to go up to a cell, a healthy cell, and sort of attach to that cell and inject its DNA. Okay, it's like a zombie almost. I mean, it's pretty medieval. Attaches to the cell, injects its DNA, and sort of takes over the function of that cell. Now that cell is infected. So what we used to do is we would attenuate the viruses. We would take the DNA out, right? And then we would still put the envelope into your body. And so we would put the polio virus in your body without the DNA. So you couldn't actually catch polio, but your immune system would see that envelope, that nucleocapsid protein. It would manufacture an antibody. So then we said, somebody in pharma came up with the idea that we could do them cheaper and in mass if we actually made synthetic copies of the DNA. So just if you just a quick basic lesson on cellular biology. If you look at a cell, if you go through the wall of a cell and you cross the cytoplasm, you find the nucleus. Inside the nucleus is the DNA. And the DNA is the boss. That's the head honcho, right? The CEO. DNA is running the show. It has two broad roles. One is replication. It makes an exact copy of itself, okay? But the other one is called transcription. It literally writes messages into the cell. It tells the cell what to do. Just like a CEO is giving orders to the board and all of the minions in the company, it's telling everybody what to do. The DNA is doing that too. It's sending messages from the nucleus of the cell out into the cell to tell the cell organelles what to do. Those messages are called mRNA, messenger RNA, okay? When they're organic, they leave the nucleus, they go into the cytoplasm of the cell, and they give a command, and they essentially dissolve. What we did was we made a synthetic copy of that message. And I'm not currently up to all of the research, but I know that we have been able to pick up those synthetic copies at least 2 years after being vaccinated. So what does this mean? It means that the message to make the spike protein, which would normally come from the DNA, has been synthetically copied. And so that message goes to the cell and it says, make the spike protein. You make a little spike protein. That organelle comes back to its desk. The message is still there. Make the spike protein. It comes back to its desk. Make the spike protein. Comes back to its desk. Make the spike protein. Make the spike protein. Make the spike protein, which spills through the cytoplasm of the cell, out into the serum of the blood, can embed itself into the arterial wall, causes a diffuse myriad of symptoms called diffuse vasculitis, which is essentially a term for, or dystonia vasculitis, inflammation of the blood vessel. It can also cause things like thrombolytic thrombocytopenia, which is abnormal platelet clotting. It shows up generally in the heart first because this is the most this is the most active area of the body. So you get myocarditis, pericarditis, which was the first symptoms that we saw. But now we're seeing downstream consequences because what happens when you take the surface area of the lining of your blood vessel? Most people think that the skin is the largest organ in the body. The skin has the surface area of about half a tennis court. The inside lining of your blood vessel, of which you have 63,000 miles of blood vessel in your body, has the surface area of about 6 tennis courts. So it's 12 times the surface area. So what if you get inflammation in all of this surface area? Well, now you've interrupted the most important barrier in the body. You cannot get contents from the blood, nutrients from the blood into the tissue. You can't get waste from the tissue back into the blood. So this exchange leads to this diffuse myriad of symptoms, which we are not linking, in my opinion, to the vaccine. Imagine the vaccine being the hub of the wheel, and you have all of these symptoms. You have mood disorders, you have cardiovascular conditions, trigeminal neuralgias, transverse myelitis, you have hormone imbalances. So you have all of these spokes, right, leaving the hub of the wheel. But what's the commonality between them? And, now we have conditions we're calling long COVID, which I think is synonymous with vaccine injury. And so we have this diffuse myriad of downstream consequences where people have mood numbness, weight gain, water retention, joint pain, neurological symptoms, memory loss, impaired focus and concentration, mental conditions, which we're diagnosing as other mental illnesses, fatigue. And then we throw these blanket diagnoses at them like chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia. And we're not linking this back to the vaccine, which very often it can be. So the whole point with the vaccines is sort of felt like this was like a gene experiment almost, like because we're copying the DNA and using a synthetic copy of that to send a message without knowing what the long-term consequences of that were. Now, I'm not qualified to make that statement either, for the record, because we don't have enough data. But neither is anyone else. There's no scientist on the planet that can tell you what the long-term consequences of mRNA vaccination is, because we just don't have the data. Operation Warp Speed waived the safety trials. It didn't waive the development of the vaccine. It waived the safety trials that normally protect the public from these things being released before we actually have a suitable data set. And again, I'm not pointing the finger on these. You know, we're in a pandemic. I assume everybody was trying to do the right thing. But this is why we have such a distrust for the elites now, because we realize, hey, maybe they don't have our best interests at heart. And this is why I'm saying that, you know, I believed more at the time in what God gave us than what man made us. I was like, well, what is the mortality rate? Well, the survival rate of this is like 99.7%.
I mean, so they 100% don't have our best interests. We just went over this with the insurance companies. You know,
well, they definitely don't.
You know, so I mean, they're the elites.
Yeah,
they do not have our best interests.
You know, I sit on the board of the NFL Alumni Association Athletica, and there's like 20 or 22,000 members in the NFL Alumni Association. These are retired NFL athletes. I remember when the pandemic first started, and I was like, okay, this is a very non-scientific, non-medical opinion, but you know, there are nose tackles, retired nose tackles that I know, that I've met. These guys are 6'6", 6'7" tall. They walk around about 320 pounds. And I also had a 5-year-old niece who was 47 pounds. I go, you will never convince me that these two people get the exact same dose of the exact same thing and have the exact same reaction. This guy looks like he ate a water buffalo for lunch. You know, she's 47 pounds. You mean I put the same thing into both of their bodies and they both have the same reaction, same amount, same bodies, same reaction? You'll never convince me of that. That was just my initial, you know, filter. I hadn't even dug really into the science, and then I just went deep down the rabbit hole of the science of the spike proteins and synthetic messaging, and you know, really didn't like what I see. But again, I'm not a physician, not a virologist, not really qualified to take that position. So I didn't vaccinate the family or let any of the people that I loved get anywhere near it. And I started messaging people about, listen, you guys should be taking zinc, methylated multivitamins, high doses of vitamin D3, getting sunlight, moving your body, you know, hydrating your body, building the defense mechanisms that the body has. Because in my opinion, that's our best way to, you know, combat what was going on. And it turns out that herd immunity actually turned out to be what ended the pandemic.
I mean, what would your advice for parents be like me? I mean, here's what I deal with. We go to the pediatrician. They tell us, you have to get these vaccines or we won't see your kids.
I know.
Now my kid's not in network. What the fuck am I supposed to do if he gets really sick or he breaks his arm, or where am I going?
Yeah, well,
you know, nobody will take me.
That's the shame, because the majority of that pediatrician's office revenue is driven by those vaccine visits, because they're on the schedule. So they know every kid is going to have a certain number of visits that they can bill for, and they bill those visits for vaccinations. Then they shame parents, and you know, through the public school system and through you know, the your pediatrician will shame you into what's not doing the right thing for your kid. But when you start to drill into, well, why was my infant given a vaccine against a sexually transmitted disease that's also transmitted by intravenous drug use when the mother didn't have that hepatitis B at the, you know, they tissue typed my wife, the viral tested my wife, she didn't have Hep B. Why'd you vaccinate my kid against a statistically non-viable risk? A lot of these, the same thing is true with tetanus. I mean, if you look at the number of kids or sub 45-year-olds, I actually think it's sub 72-year-olds that have died from a cut from a rusty nail, it's zero. To see any statistical validity, you got to be over 72, 75 years old. But we're vaccinating against these. Why are we vaccinating against shingles? Shingles is not something that you catch. It's not a virus that you catch. It's a virus you've always had. Shingles is you know, mono as a child, coming back as as shingles. Just like Epstein-Barr is not a virus that you catch. Epstein-Barr is, Epstein-Barr was mono as a child, coming back as Epstein-Barr. Shingles is chickenpox that you had as a child, coming back as shingles. So I think a lot of times we're led to believe that we catch these viruses, that these viruses happen to us. They don't. They happen within us. If you look at a strand of human DNA, only 60% of an average strand of human DNA is human. 40% of our DNA is viral. 40% of every one of our DNA strands is viral. So what does this mean? It means that every time your DNA unzips and rezips, we silence those viruses. How is it that you could have had mono in 8th grade and I can still tell when you're 50 years old that you had mono? Because I can actually look for the antibodies. I can look for something called IgG antibodies. What are those antibodies doing? And so what happens is that when the DNA unzips and it rezips, those viruses are silenced. What happens is our immune system weakens. As our immune system weakens, we become more susceptible to these viruses, not happening to us, happening within us. So when our immune system is weak, wow, we get shingles. We didn't catch shingles. We always had it. It was the chickenpox virus. We got Epstein-Barr. And what happened? How did I get Epstein-Barr? Well, mono came back as Epstein-Barr virus, and you could go through a whole sequence of these. So by strengthening the immune system is the best way to build immunity to these pathogens. You know, when you weaken the immune system, you start to come up with things like autoimmune disease. You know, if you have an autoimmune condition, for example, let's say Hashimoto's or Crohn's disease or Sjogren's or any number of autoimmune diseases, what you're led to believe is you woke up one day and your immune system decided to attack this tissue in the body. So if you have Crohn's disease, for example, you woke up one day and your immune system is manufacturing antibodies to the colon. Well, why did my immune system just decide to attack the colon? First of all, I think we should take a step back and say, I'm going to assume that God didn't make a mistake. I'm actually going to assume that the immune system's acting properly. And I just need to figure out why is it attacking the colon. I'm not just going to assume that my immune system went haywire one morning and just decided to attack my colon, or went haywire one day and decided to attack my thyroid. Now I have Hashimoto's, or attack my lacrimal gland in my eye and I've got Sjogren's. What I'm going to assume is the immune system is there for a reason. And I want to figure out why it's there. And if you look at functional medicine, a lot of functional medicine doctors will tell you, and again, I'm not a physician, that there is only a single cell layer separating you from your inside world from your outside world. So your intestinal tract is outside of your body. The tube runs through your body, but it's external to your body. It's actually contiguous with the back of your forearm. You can follow the skin inside your mouth all the way down and right out the rectum. So what separates you from your outside world is a single layer of cells, one cell layer. If this cell layer is disrupted, contents from your gut will leak through the gut and they will get into, it's called leaky gut, they will get into an area of the body, outside the luminal wall of the gut or into the bloodstream where it doesn't belong. And where's your immune system? Well, 70% of our immune system is sitting right outside of our gut. And the reason why 70% of our immune system is sitting right here is because that's where all the action is. And so if you have leaky gut and you have pathogens and bacteria and contents from the gut leaking into the bloodstream, the immune system shows up. And when something hides in your, like just to sort of give you a visual, if this is a heavy metal or a virus or a pathogen, okay, and it's going to hide, right? It's leaks out of your gut. And this is a healthy cell. It doesn't park itself next to the cell like this. It parks itself right there. It hides inside the cell. So what happens when you have these contents move into a cell? The immune system is chasing that, right? Now it's inside the cell, so what does it do? It manufactures an antibody to that cell. Not to kill the cell, but to get to that, right? So if you help the body find this, the heavy metal, the mold spore, the mycotoxin, the virus, the bacteria, and you support the immune system and seal and heal the gut, you see very often these autoimmune diseases that people are diagnosed with, where they're put on immunosuppressants and they're put on massive amounts of corticosteroids or steroid anti-inflammatories, is because we're holding the immune system responsible for a crime it didn't commit. It's actually there acting in your best interest, and we're suppressing it. So, you know, in Crohn's disease, and I'm not saying this for all Crohn's disease, and I don't know why I just picked that one, but you know, you interrupt the integrity of the gut, pathogens leak out, the immune system attacks them, and now we go that you got an autoimmune disease.
Wow.
Instead of saying, hey, listen, why don't we do the viral testing, the bacterial testing? Why don't we actually heal and seal and fix your gut? And we know now, for example, that the gut is the gateway. We even call it our second brain. And the reason why we call it our second brain is because our mood and our emotional state, our focus, our concentration, our awareness, our alertness, these are controlled, amongst other things, by neurotransmitters in our brain, the majority of which are made in our gut. You know, for decades, we followed something called the serotonin hypothesis of depression. So the serotonin hypothesis of depression, which was the widely dominant hypothesis in depression, was if you are low on serotonin, you are by definition depressed. Okay, so if the definition of depression is low serotonin, then why isn't the fix to raise serotonin? Right? Because that's not what we do. For most people that are depressed, we put them on selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. We put them on SSRIs. And SSRIs, for lack of better words, they bind to a receptor in the brain. They slow the uptake of serotonin. So basically, they're rationing what little serotonin you have. So it's a form of rationing. So because it's not allowing the brain to uptake it. And the theory is, well, if you don't use it too fast, you don't go off a cliff, right? But if we just took a step back and said, well, where's serotonin come from? Well, 90% of the serotonin in our bodies is right here. If you don't have it here, you can't have it here. So is it possible that depression actually begins here rather than in our outside environment?
Interesting.
Right? And so if 90% of the serotonin, which by the way travels up the vagus nerve, goes into the brain, creates mood, creates emotion. If you said to me, what's a mood? What's an emotional state? I would tell you it's a collection of neurotransmitters. If you're deficient in a neurotransmitter, you can't manufacture a mood. And now you have a mood disorder. You have a mental illness. You don't have a mental illness. You have a deficiency, right? If I went to anybody that's listening to this podcast right now, just magically suck the dopamine out of their body or suck the serotonin neurotransmitter out of their body. Any mood that required that neurotransmitter, they couldn't manufacture. Well, they would be told that they had a mental illness or they had a mental disease or they had a mood disorder. The truth is they have a deficiency. Why wouldn't we look to fix the gut, to restore the serotonin so that the brain has adequate levels so you can express normal mood? Instead of just slotting people into these categories and saying, you're mentally ill, you're mentally unstable, you have a mood disorder. As soon as you say that to somebody, they accept that. And now they accept that they need to be on a lifetime of medication because something's wrong with their brain or something has happened to them that they can't control. Right? And people are walking around suffering from anxiety, from depression. No one even tells them what it is. You know, I bet there's a vast percentage of your listeners that at some point in their life they either are suffering from or they know somebody who's suffering from severe anxiety. And I bet they have never even been told what it is. If you ask most practitioners, most physicians, what's anxiety? They're going to tell you the characteristics of it. It's a sensation of fear without the presence of a fear. It's the sensation of impending doom without there actually being a threat. I'm taking a scenario in the future to worst case scenario when that scenario's never happened. Well, those are all the characteristics of it. The truth is, anxiety at its genesis is a rise in a class of neurotransmitters called catecholamines, which creates a fight or flight-like response. So if you were able to regulate catecholamines, you wouldn't feel fear, right? If you ask most people that suffer from anxiety 3 questions, you'll find out very quickly that it's a deficiency and not coming from their outside environment. If you know someone that's suffering from anxiety and you say, have you had it on and off throughout your entire lifetime? They'll say yes. If you say, can you point to the specific trigger that causes it? They'll say, no. I can be sitting in a podcast right now with Shawn Ryan and I can just all of a sudden be overwhelmed by anxiety. And number 3, if you say, well, if you've tried anti-anxiety medications, did they work? They'll say, no, they made me feel like a zombie. You get those questions, you know that it's not coming from the outside environment. It's coming from right here.
Wow.
So
real quick, just rewinding. What advice do you have for parents like me on vaccinations?
I'm going to put a link because it's going to be too much to go on here. I'm going to put a link to a vaccine schedule, a book that was written by, in my opinion, one of the top MDs, PhDs in the world on what are the viable vaccines and what are the ones to avoid. So you just take his opinion, and he's got all the research and all the cited things, and let's just put it in the show notes so
Perfect.
All the families can have.
Do you know the
access to
name of the book off the top of your head?
It's either called Born Immune. I think it's called Born Immune.
We'll text you.
Or it's either Born Immune or Born Immunity. But I'm gonna put the link in.
Perfect.
It's excellent, and it's all evidence based, and it's not fear mongering, and it gives you the actual statistical variables. Like like if you get this vaccination, your son or daughter has a higher chance of dying in a motor vehicle accident on the way to school than they do of dying from this pathogen. So you decide if you want to vaccinate against it or not. I mean, because some of the things that we're vaccinating against are statistically completely irrelevant, right? You have a near zero risk. We don't vaccinate against near zero risks. There's a risk every time you put your child in the car and go to the grocery store. There's a risk. Every time you get on a commercial airplane, there's a risk. It's a quantifiable risk. But we should apply the same kind of just common sense standard to vaccination.
Another question, follow-up question. A lot of people took the COVID vaccine. A lot of people regret taking the COVID vaccine. I can't even believe I'm admitting this. I took the COVID vaccine. Mm-hmm. I was worried. My son was about to be born. Hospital rules. I was like, there is no way in hell I'm going to miss the birth of my son. Mm-hmm. So I took it because I was worried they would require it and I would miss the birth of my son. And with all the other shit I've done in my life, I went into the drugs, all that
right.
stuff on your podcast. Yeah. I was like, well, if that didn't kill me, this isn't going to fucking kill me.
Right.
But, and I don't feel like I have any side effects.
Mm-hmm. And most people don't. I mean, just if you got one or two and didn't go down the sequence of boosters, it's very likely that you're fine. But I can tell you what you can do.
So what I want to ask is there any reversing that? Is there anything that people can do? I've heard a lot about this. Actually, I'm going to go do plasma exchange.
Mm-hmm. Therapeutic plasma exchange.
And is there anything people can do to clean their blood or clean their system out with yes. prior vaccinations?
Yeah. So there are less expensive versions and there are very expensive versions. Plasma exchange is expensive. That's called therapeutic plasma exchange or total plasma exchange. And essentially what they do there, and I've had it done, feels amazing, by the way, is they pull your blood out, they run it through a machine, they separate your plasma from your whole blood, and they actually take your plasma out and they replace it with sterile albumin. And so you actually replace the plasma with albumin, which is a sterile fluid that's safe to replace your plasma with. Because in your plasma, aside from platelets and other things, are mold spores, mycotoxins, if you have them, viral pathogens, heavy metals, glyphosate, you'll find microplastics, and also spike protein. So there are lots of things in your plasma that kind of hang out in the plasma that can be pro-inflammatory and cause consequences down the road. And by exchanging the plasma, the theory is that you can get rid of a lot of those consequences. There is also Dr. McCullough formulated an over-the-counter capsule that has nattokinase, bromelain, and thymulin in it, which are very safe. And these are ways of binding spike protein and carrying it out of the body. You can actually see urinary spike protein levels drop after taking these, and they're inexpensive. They're regular over-the-counter, and there are formulations for spike protein detox. You can even Google spike protein detox, and you'll find ones with nattokinase, bromelain, and the thymulin in them. Those are the higher quality spike protein detoxifications. And you can do pre and post urine spike protein analyses, and you can actually see that you've reduced it.
Wow.
If you have severe long hauler COVID syndrome, and this is not FDA approved, but I've seen the clinical evidence on it. There are clinics outside the United States, some in Tijuana, other parts of the world, where you can do a blood filtration, which is similar to very similar to dialysis, right? Where you take blood out of one side of the body, you put it back in the other body, and it either runs through carbon filtration or heparin binding filters, or other types of filters, and then it puts the plasma and blood back into the body, and it actually can pull certain toxic chemicals out. So there's plasma exchange, which I've done. There's blood filtration, which you do generally outside the United States, which I have not done yet, but I'm doing it in December, just for general longevity purposes. And then there are over-the-counter spike protein detox you can take with the nattokinase, the bromelain, the thymine.
Wow. Thank you, Gary.
You're awesome.
On that note,
take another quick break.
Let's take a quick break. The economy has been a major burden on Americans. Wages are flat, expenses are up, and it keeps getting harder to pay all the bills without reaching for credit cards. If you're a homeowner and you're frustrated with that cycle, I want you to make a 10-minute, no-obligation call today to the people over at American Financing. Interest rates have dropped, and if you're constantly carrying a credit card balance each and every month with a rate in the 20s, American Financing can show you how to put your hard-earned equity to work and get you out of debt. Their salary-based mortgage consultants are saving their customers at an average of $800 a month. And if you get started today, you may not have to make the next month's mortgage payment. Call American Financing today, 866-781-8900. That's 866-781-8900. Or go to americanfinancing.net/SRS. You sign up for something, forget about it after the trial ends, then you're charged month after month after month. The subscriptions are there, but you're not using them. 85% of people have at least one paid subscription going unused every month. Thanks to Rocket Money, I can see all my subscriptions in one place and cancel the ones I'm not using anymore. And now I'm saving more money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money's dashboard gives you a clear view of your expenses across all of your accounts and keeps you informed with alerts if bills increase in price, there's unusual spending activity, or if you're close to going over budget. Rocket Money will even automatically scan your bills to find opportunities to save and lower your bills. Then you can ask them to negotiate for you. They'll deal with customer service so you don't have to. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/SRS today. That's rocketmoney.com/SRS. rocketmoney.com/SRS. All right, Gary, we're back from the break.
Yeah.
You are blowing my mind here with all this information. Let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
You know, you'd brought up something about evolution at the very beginning, and we were kind of talking about faith. And so I want you to dive into a little bit about evolution. I've never covered this. And
Yeah.
so I would love to hear, what you have to say about that.
Well, I'm not a believer in evolution at all. And I have a faith-based background. I actually was raised Roman Catholic, and oddly,
Me too.
were you really?
I was.
It was the worst. I'll be honest with you. I hated church when I was a kid. Stand up, sit down, kneel, shake hands. Half of our mass was in Latin. But my dad always made me like put on a suit coat, when I was a little kid and go to church. So I got pretty far away from the church in like high school and college. But in grad school, an attorney of mine brought me to a Promise Keepers convention. There used to be a Christian men's movement. It might still be around. I don't hear much about it anymore, but there was a huge Christian men's movement called Promise Keepers. And there was they were hosting an event at Soldier Field. This was in '94.
Why did he bring you? Was there something going on?
He just thought that, he thought like every young man was kind of searching. And, I was in grad school. I was at National College of Chiropractic, and I was getting my human biology degree. But I think I was probably like every other grad school kid. I was partying and, going out and wasn't particularly responsible. And I had actually just started dating my first wife. And he was my attorney for a car accident. I got rear-ended towing a boat on the highway, and we actually struck up a really good friendship. He was a really good guy. He was kind of a mentor to me. And he convinced me that there was like this motivational speakers event happening at Soldier Field. And he invited me to it. And it turned out to be a Promise Keepers convention. And it was this Christian men's movement. And I'll never forget, like we were standing in Soldier Field and 70,000 men joined hands and started to say the Lord's Prayer. And I knew the Lord's Prayer because I was raised Roman Catholic. And something happened to me. I mean, first of all, I had this just overwhelming sensation that 70,000 men couldn't be wrong. Like, it went from feeling very odd to feeling like very right. And then for some reason, I just broke down and just started like bawling uncontrollably. And I wasn't sad. I don't know. I mean, now I think that was the Holy Spirit, but I just started crying uncontrollably, and he was calling people down to the stage to give their life to Christ. And
Was it like gratitude?
I think it was gratitude, but I think it was also like a sense of relief.
Interesting.
Because I remember leaving there thinking everything I had thought about my upbringing in the church, because the church that I went to, and this is not to, this is no condemnation of it, but it just made you feel like a sinner a lot. Some of the mass was in Latin. The priest was much older. I felt very narrow-minded, and I was like, every time I left church, I felt bad about myself. And this movement, this march was like, you can have a direct relationship with Christ. You can lay your problems at the foot of the cross. You don't need all of this superfluous surroundings. You don't need a church or an institution or a group of people. I mean, you can get on your knees and just have a direct relationship with Christ. And that to me seemed liberating. And I like the idea of faith because it's the idea of delayed gratification. And I think that's dramatically missing in this world.
Me too.
Because everybody's into like the instant gratification and the idea that we're all heading to a better place, and that there is a higher purpose. And so I gave my life to Christ, and I won't say that I've been the best Christian ever since 1994. I've definitely done some non-Christian things, but that to me has been very liberating. I wake up every day now and I go outside, I do my breath work, I do some sunlight, and I always just take a minute to thank God and just say, hey, listen, I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm just here to say thank you, because I feel for the first time that God's revealed his purpose to me. And I feel like my passion and my purpose, my career, my calling has all kind of aligned itself. And it takes away a lot of the fears. I think Christianity, if you realize that if you want to shrink your problems, you just grow your purpose. And so it's helped me grow my purpose. And so the friction in my life has seemed so much easier to deal with.
Wow.
And I'm not any more righteous than anybody else. But I feel such a level of conviction now with my messaging, and I've had tough partnerships in the past. Certainly not all my partner's fault. A lot of it my fault. But I just know now that my purpose on this earth is to get this message to the masses.
Well, it's working.
Thank you.
It's working. And I just, we haven't really covered this because of, I don't really know where to put it, and I don't know how much you want to talk about it. But when we talk about, when we're talking, friendly business, how I do things, how you do things, and when I hear, you talk about you've walked away from businesses, you've turned advertising deals down, you have, you only talk about what you believe in, whether you're being paid in or not. I mean, we just had, you had just mentioned, a lot of the things that you're shouting out, pretty much all of them that we've spoken about, you get nothing out of, and I think it's, this takes a very authentic person to do that. And, and
Thank you.
We share a lot of the same values, and there's not a lot of people out there that share those same values. And it's really cool to see. And you know, I keep bringing up the Yucca thing because that's my my latest thing that I'm like really excited about, that I would, you know, love to be in some type of thing. But I don't care, you know, because it's like I mentioned, I do believe that, you know, it all comes back around. And if you inject good into this world, then it's going to come back around to you some other way, somehow, some other way.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, you know, for people to, I know it happens to me, you know, and whether it's, you know, one of the things that I really like doing on this podcast is being able to, I mean, this is how it started, because I couldn't reach people like you, or, you know, people that have made a big name for themselves. And I've always rooted for the underdog. And so I'll find the guy that's, you know, like we were talking about Tyler Andrew Vargas with his knife company, and, you know, to bring his story out and then display what he's doing now to give him a fucking jet launch into,
so awesome,
into the business world. I mean, I get nothing out of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I get a friendship and in a new connection. I love Tyler.
Yeah.
Wish the best for that dude, and
anybody's
I keep in touch with him. But you know, but that comes back around, you know, and you do that too, and that's just really fucking cool to see, man.
No, thank you. I mean,
I wish more people knew that about you.
Yeah, you know, I when I first, you know, I founded a wellness clinic, which with my now wife, girlfriend, in 2017, and you know, it did very well for itself. In 2021, you know, we sold it and took on some partners and took on a minority stake, and we recently exited that. And then I started a media platform, and the reason why I started the podcast was because I didn't want the message to be controlled. You know, I wanted to very often give without the expectation of receipt, but I also don't want to create the illusion that you know, I'm just running a philanthropy. I've done very well for myself financially. I mean, God's been very, very good to me. But also, you know, the messaging is not about any one product or any one service, or you know, wearing a certain T-shirt, or only messaging about this is the sole and only path to you know, a state of optimal health, or to solve your problems, and it happens to be through my supplement or my testing, or, you know, only through my clinics. There's so many people out there that are doing incredible work. Like, my heroes are the PhDs and the MDs and the researchers and the scientists that are actually really making an impact. And one of the things I decided was I want to build a, you know, podcast, a media platform, to find the best products, the best services, the best people, and try to give them a voice. And unfortunately, that sometimes conflicts with your other, you know, business endeavors, because it may not be the supplement that you manufacture or the test that you require your clients to do. And I think that gets very myopic, right? You know, when you say there's only one way to optimal health, and it's through my company, through my supplement, through my testing, through, you know, there are so many people that are doing amazing things for this world. Some of them I have financial relationships with, like Echo Water Bottles and Perfect Aminos and Baja Gold Sea Salt, but I believe deeply in those companies. And then others that I find that deserve a voice, that I get no financial reward from of any kind. I mean, half the brands that I've shouted out on the podcast so far, I have no relationship with at all. They thank me all the time. I get tons of their, you know, they ship me tons of stuff to the house, but other than that, and it's because I wish more of us thought about that, because the tide raises all the boats. And I think that we've been given a gift in my industry, you know, the wellness, functional medicine space, you know, longevity, whatever you want to call it. And I think that post-pandemic, there's such a distrust of the global elites, and people realize that, you know what, maybe our government and the elites don't have our best interests at heart, and I need to take this decision. You know, I need to take optimal health into my own hands. I need to become my own citizen scientist. But the question is, where do they go for messaging? If you get on the internet, you'll get paralysis of analysis. I mean, one person tells you the eggs are going to kill you. The next person tells you got to be eat eggs every day. You know, one person tells you the carnivore diet's the be-all, end-all, and the next person tells you it's the fastest way to get cardiovascular disease. So what I'm trying to do is sift through the noise and be as authentic about that messaging as possible. And a lot of that, there's no way to monetize. But I think that, again, that's how I know that I'm on God's purpose, because this information does not belong to me, right? It belongs to humanity. I'm just sort of blessed enough to have it flow through me. And
You're a conduit.
yeah, just a conduit, right? I'm not the
So I
genius.
feel.
I didn't come up with it. It's I don't have anything special. It's just, but it very often flows through me. And like I made a couple of public announcements on Instagram the other day. It's still on my Instagram. My wife and I sat for 3 days, almost in tears, because of the thousands, and they're still up on my Instagram, the thousands and thousands of messages we got from people whose lives had changed. And we didn't know who they were. We had no direct contact with them. We'd never benefited from anything we'd done. Just the message hit them at the right time, and they either started doing breath work or sunlight or grounding or cold plunging or, eating whole foods, or they got on some of the supplements that I recommended. They stopped believing that they had autoimmune disease or a mental illness or a psychiatric disorder, and they actually started focusing on their gut, and their life completely changed. They're like, I don't have Crohn's disease anymore. I finally, started to hack my sleep. I don't have the mental illness. Anxiety's gone down 85%. We're able to conceive now, because I talk a lot about folic acid and the right supplements that young women are trying to get pregnant on, trying to conceive. Because miscarriages, especially in young females, are highly linked to a gene mutation called MTHFR. Affectionately called the motherfucker gene, but it stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. About 44% of the population has this gene mutation. And, the first thing that women are told when they get pregnant is to take high doses of folic acid. And most women don't realize that folic acid is not a natural compound. We've been told it's vitamin B9. It's not. We make folic acid in a laboratory. Folic acid doesn't occur anywhere naturally in nature. You can't find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth. Yet it's necessary to have a healthy pregnancy because it reduces neural tube defects. That's actually not true. Folic acid doesn't reduce anything. Folic acid has to be converted by the body into the usable form called methylfolate, in order to prevent a neural tube defect, in order to not have the cell go into something called S-phase arrest. So what happens is, if 44% of the population has a genetic mutation called MTHFR, where they can't process this folic acid. And by the way, I'll put the link to this to the clinical study that supports what I'm about to say, because I get a lot of flack from this too. When you take a synthetic compound that didn't even exist until 1993, and you make it a requirement to have a healthy pregnancy, what you're doing is you're assuming that the body would have a deficiency in folic acid, which can't. No one can have a deficiency in folic acid. You can have a deficiency in folate, but you can't be deficient in a synthetic nutrient. And you pump the population full of this folic acid. If you don't have the gene mutation, you can create the raw material the body needs, called methylfolate. If you do have the gene mutation, then all the folic acid in the world doesn't matter, because your body can't create the usable form of that nutrient. And when you can't create the usable form of that nutrient, when your DNA is replicating, it goes into something called S-phase arrest, which is essentially where it stops the replicating at that level. And what are the consequences of that? Well, if you look at what this gene mutation, which is essentially results in a deficiency in methylfolate, causes, it causes the intestinal motility to slow down. So these people have gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, and cramping. And then they start going down all the usual roads. They start going and getting food sensitivity testing and food allergy testing, and yet nothing works. They eat the same thing on Monday, and they're fine. They eat the exact same thing on Wednesday, and they blow up like a tick. And they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. I ate the exact same food Monday morning, and I was fine. I ate it again on Wednesday, and now I'm blowing up like a tick. So right there, it should tell you that you don't have an allergy, right? Because allergies are consistent. They're not transient, right? People are not allergic to milk on Monday, unallergic on Wednesday afternoon, and re-allergic on Saturday morning. Allergies are very easy to spot. Like, there's no adult listening to this podcast right now that has a shellfish allergy that doesn't know it, right? You don't make it to adulthood and not know that you have this allergy. So what we fail to realize is very often a nutrient deficiency, specifically methylfolate, because your body can't break down folic acid. This nutrient deficiency can interrupt the pace of the gut, the peristaltic activity of the gut. So what happens when you interrupt that peristaltic activity in the gut? Gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, cramping. Well, what else happens? Well, this is where our neurotransmitters are manufactured. This is why to this day, in 9 years of being in this industry intensely, I've never met a patient that tells me they suffer from severe anxiety that does not also have gut issues, not once. Because the anxiety is not coming from the outside environment, it's coming from the gut. And so, and these poor people go down the road of food sensitivity, food allergy testing, to go on a carnivore diet, to go on keto, paleo, what have you. Sometimes carnivore will solve it because they happen to get to the methylfolate. And when you realize that these are just nutrient deficiencies, and so women, for example, that become pregnant and take high doses of this folic acid, they all of a sudden, they can't process folic acid. So they're taking the folic acid because their doctor tells them to take it to prevent a neural tube defect. So like a good mother, they take it. And then they don't realize that they can't convert it. So it's actually not preventing the neural tube defect and helping the fetus the way they want it to. And this high amounts of folic acid rise in their blood, and it causes all kinds of psychiatric conditions, including postpartum depression, which begins during pregnancy, even though it's called postpartum depression. And eventually what happens to a lot of these women is their pregnancy ends, they stop taking their prenatal vitamin, and their symptoms go away. So they blame it on the pregnancy, not on the vitamin. And so one of the messages that I really try to get out there is that if you have ADD, ADHD, OCD, focus and concentration problems, or your kids have behavioral issues, or they have issues with focus, concentration, completing assignments, paying attention, not being disruptive in class, for 1 week, get the folic acid out of their diet. Get them on a kid's multivitamin that has methylfolate. Just do this for 1 week. And you tell me if you don't have a completely different child in the house. The reason for this is 44% of the population, including children, have this gene mutation where they can't process folic acid. Well, where do we find folic acid? Well, in the United States, which is what's really screwed up about our chemical and food industry. In the United States, by law, all white flour, white rice, bread, pasta, cereals, grains of any kind are sprayed with the chemical folic acid. It's not called sprayed with folic acid. It's called fortified or enriched. So when you spin a box of crackers around, or you see flour or breads or pastas or cereals or grains, and it says enriched bleached white flour, fortified whole wheat, fortified or enriched grains, fortified cereal, enriched cereal, that means it's been sprayed with folic acid, which 44% of the population can't process. You take a little child that has this gene mutation, which 44% of them do, and what do we feed them in the morning for breakfast? White bagels, full of folic acid, cereal, full of folic acid, Pop-Tarts, full of folic acid, any of these things. And you dump 1,800% of the daily allowance of folic acid into that little body. It's a full contact sport to get that kid in the car to go to school in the morning. And when they get to school, the call comes home and it says, hey, little Johnny can't pay attention. He's disruptive. He doesn't follow instructions. He doesn't complete assignments. We need to bring in the Ritalin to solve this. And that's where the hamster wheel starts. If you just got the folic acid, the synthetic compound that does not occur naturally in nature, and gave them methylfolate as a supplement, and just got the fortified or enriched foods out of their diet for a week, you'd very often have a completely different in the house. And there's so many people that are dealing with this. You know, these kids that are, the rates of not just autism, which have gone from 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 32 in the last 40 years, the rates of attention deficit disorder are on an absolute parabolic tear. I mean, you want to talk about a pandemic, but no one really tells you that attention deficit disorder is not even a deficit of attention. Attention deficit disorder is not an inability to pay attention. It's actually an attention overload disorder. It's too many windows open at the same time, right? So people that have ADD or ADHD don't lack the ability to pay attention. They lack the ability to pay attention to so many things. So why is it that you're opening windows faster than you're closing them? The reason is that in the human mind, we don't just create thought, we also dismantle thought. We break thought down. We break down emotion, we break down mood, we break down thought. If you degrade thought at a slower rate than you create it, then the mind becomes very clouded, right? You're thinking about a vacation a job you're working on, let's say. You're thinking about a job you're working on and your friend walks up. And now you're thinking about a job, you start talking to your friend. And you notice a logo on your friend's jacket that reminds you of a vacation you want to take. So now you're thinking about a job, looking at the logo, talking to your friend, thinking about a vacation you want to take. Like all at the same time. And then your friend says something to you and you're like not with it. And you're like, hey, are you there? What's happening is you're creating thought at a faster rate than you're breaking it down. Very often stimulated by folic acid and driven by a lack of methylfolate. And so when you put these compounds back in the body, very often thought process returns to normal, right? In other words, the degradation of thought returns to normal and you start sequencing thought normally. Because you didn't have an attention deficit disorder, you had an attention overload disorder. You were opening too many windows at the same time. Modern medicine says, hey, if the mind's racing, right? If you're opening all these windows, right? So the mind's racing, let's put an amphetamine into the body to race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind. That's what Vyvanse, Adderall, and Ritalin are. They're basically glorified amphetamines. So now you're taking the system, the central nervous system, which is not broken, and you're breaking it to match the system that is broken, right? Which is a terrible idea. It's like getting a flat tire and then getting out of your car and slashing your other 3 tires to create equilibrium. So one of the messages, I don't even know how we got on this path. I'm like way down the road.
We were talking about faith.
We were talking about faith. I'm betting that you turn somewhere, dude. I'm
and eventually
sorry.
I'm going to bring it back to
anyways,
disproving
methylfolate,
evolution.
guys. Take methylfolate. Get the folic acid out of your diet.
Let's, wow. I'm glad we covered that.
I'm glad we are too, because that's really, if you got moms and dads listening to this podcast that have little kids that have those issues.
I have those issues. I grew up taking Adderall and Ritalin.
Yeah.
Still took it all the way up to psychedelics and stopped it. But I do have too many windows open.
Yeah.
So
most people do.
It's never been explained to me like that. So, you know.
We got to degrade thought. The same thing happens to people with sleep issues. We're going to get into your labs in a second, and I'm going to explain why people that are the most exhausted, why they sleep the worst. Because you think it would be the opposite, right? You think that people that are really exhausted, the only thing they do well is sleep. But actually, the people that are the most exhausted sleep the worst. And I'm going to point out what they need to look at in the labs to fix that. But the majority of people that are listening to this podcast right now that have really poor sleep patterns or have just a really tough time sleeping, the reason why they have a tough time sleeping is because when they lay down to go to sleep and they're body tired, their mind is awake. If you ask them, they will tell you, I'm not sleeping because my mind is awake, not because I'm not tired. So what happens is, as their environment quiets, their mind wakes up. So why does your mind wake up at night when there's no stimulus? It's because there's a category of neurotransmitters in our brain called catecholamines. Okay, these are fight or flight neurotransmitters: dopamine, norepinephrine, ephedrine, adrenaline. When these neurotransmitters start to rise, what they do is they create a wakened state. If they continue to rise, you'll feel anxious. If they rise further, you'll feel anxiety. If they continue to rise, you can have paranoias or even a full-blown panic attack. So if we realize that as a certain class of neurotransmitters rises, our mind enters a wakened state. And if we realize that if we don't have the right raw material in our body, specifically the right complex of B vitamins, methylfolate, a form of B12 called methylcobalamin, which is just a form of the light metal B12, then what happens is we have a difficult time breaking these neurotransmitters down, quieting these neurotransmitters. So at night, our mind wakes up. And what we'll do is we'll ruminate on the most innocuous little shit. Like you will lay there just thinking, did I get everything on my grocery list? Did my belt match my shoes? Should I have a Thanksgiving Day party with my family? You'll just ruminate on the most nonsensical things, and it will just eat away at your sleep for hours. And people get frustrated because they realize I'm exhausted, but I can't fall asleep. As soon as you put the right raw materials back into the human body, methylated nutrients, very often their mind starts to quiet down at night, and they don't have to tranquilize themselves to go to sleep. And so a lot of the conditions that we accept as a consequence of aging, or, little Johnny's just got attention deficit disorder, but everybody's got attention deficit disorder. I have a hard time falling asleep, but I'm in my 40s and I got 3 kids and I shouldn't fall asleep. But none of that is true. These are not consequences of aging. They are consequences of missing raw material in our bodies. And these raw materials are very easy to put back in. So back to faith. Sorry.
No, that's, I struggle with all these.
Yeah,
I struggle with all these.
So do a lot of your
sleep and
listeners, I promise you.
Oh yeah, I have one of the biggest veteran audiences in the world, in the country. So we all struggle with sleep. So that was super informative. And the challenge with sleep very often, and I want to get into it in your labs because I think we can solve this issue for a lot of your listeners. Number one, they should be looking at taking methylated vitamins, taking methylfolate at night, taking magnesium at night, the light metals that create the deficiency that make it hard to quiet the mind. The second thing they ought to really think about is getting their blood work done and getting some data and looking at their hormone levels in men, very specifically testosterone, because it's very hard for most physicians to link deficiencies in a hormone like testosterone to poor sleep patterns. But what happens is testosterone, and we can talk about this further with your labs, but testosterone, one of its primary roles is actually not male characteristics. That's why women are afraid of testosterone therapy, because they think it leads to facial hair and aggression and big muscles and a deep voice, and that's actually not true. One of the primary roles of the hormone testosterone in men and women is to actually put pressure on the bone marrow to create new red blood cells. So this is called erythropoiesis, right? And the production of new red blood cells. Same thing happens when you go to altitude, for example. So let's say you have low testosterone and you have low production of red blood cells. You don't have anemia, but you have a very low red blood cell count. So what does this mean? You have very few vehicles in your blood to transport oxygen, okay? And this hides in plain sight. So people that have sleep issues or energy issues should listen really closely, because you'll go get your blood work done by a physician and there's a range for red blood cells. So it will be within range, but you'll be down in the bottom 10 percentile. Then there's a second thing on your labs called hemoglobin, which is kind of like the fluid in the red blood cell. It tells you how much hemoglobin is in that cell. And that's in the bottom 10 or 15 percentile. They're in the normal range. But what happens when I start to delete red blood cells from the bloodstream and when I start to drain them of hemoglobin, and I'm oversimplifying this for a moment, is I have less fluid to carry oxygen. And what's the result of that? I'm tired. I'm tired because I'm hypoxic. And I'm hypoxic because I'm low on red blood cells. And I'm low on red blood cells very often because I'm deficient in the hormone testosterone. And so when somebody says they're low on energy, if you convert that statement to physiology, they're almost saying I'm low on red blood cells. I'm low on hemoglobin. Maybe because I'm low on testosterone, which is why I really believe that people should get hormone panels done. And not everybody needs to be on testosterone. There are lots of ways to raise it without taking the hormone. But my point is, now if you're tired all the time, right? Because your blood doesn't carry oxygen well, what happens when you go to sleep? You lay down to go to sleep, your respiratory rate gets very shallow, right? You take shallow breaths. So the oxygen level in your blood drops. Well, your blood's already poor at carrying oxygen. So now as your respiratory rate drops and the blood oxygen level drops, you're marginally suffocating. And so what happens is, as you start to get into a deep sleep, your brain wakes you up. You will pulse cortisol at night to keep your body out of a deep sleep because your brain is keeping you from suffocating. Then people do the worst thing,
instead of fixing their hormone and raising their red blood cell count, they actually go to their doctor and say, "Doc, I can't sleep." The doc gives them zolpidem nitrate, diazepam, Xanax,
Ambien.
Lesta, Ambien, whatever it is. What a lot of these drugs do is they essentially blindfold the brain's view of blood oxygen. And it allows you to get into a sleep because your brain won't wake you up. But then you wake up in the morning and go, "Man, I hate taking Tylenol PM because it's still in my system the next morning." Or when I wake up from Ambien, I'm really groggy and I'm foggy. That medication's been out of your system for hours. You are feeling the effects of having suffocated for 6 hours. That's why you're groggy. That's why you can't focus. That's why you're sore and stiff and achy.
Wow.
So if you went back and fixed the hormones very often, you would fix the signal to the bone marrow, you would fix the red blood cell count, which would fix the oxygen transport, which would not only give you more energy, but it would deepen your sleep.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Makes a hell of a lot of sense. You got a great way of breaking things down.
Thanks.
You really do.
Yeah.
Even for somebody like me to understand. So, but I would love to hear you disprove evolution. Can we do that?
Well, the main issue with evolution is the following. The main issue with evolution is we have taken enormous scientific leaps in the fossil records, right? So if evolution is true, then you find single-celled or multi-celled organisms, right? And you go from single-celled or two-celled organisms to four-celled, to 8-celled, to 16-celled. You go through a progressive evolution, if you will, of these organisms evolving into an increasingly more being-like creature. So evolution says basically that some bacteria got together in a mud puddle and they mated, and we went from single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms to quadricellular to hexacellular to multicellular, and then these organisms began to form into systems that created organ systems, and then you basically had what is a rudimentary non-air breathing organism that was in the water to an organism that had gills, and then those gills moved out onto land, and then they started to breathe oxygen. And then this whole lineage of species evolved from this. The problem is there's zero evidence of that. The problem is you have these single-celled organisms and multi-celled organisms, and then there's just a giant gap in the fossil record. And you have animals, and then you have man. But we don't have a fossil record that takes us from single and multi-celled organisms into an entire species. And we just simply ignore that.
Wow.
And so
I didn't know that.
we ignore the science that would validate that evolution was. And two, for me, when I really study the human body, and by the way, we have barely scratched the surface of understanding this thing that God created. It is fascinating in its ability. Modern medicine will say, well, that was a miracle cure. It's not a miracle cure. It's when people are miraculously cured from things, it's because they figured out the deficiency, or they figured out that we're an entire being. We've lost faith in the ability that this has over this. The medicine treats our mental health and our physical health almost as separate creatures. And so you destroy somebody's gut health, their mental health will follow. You will not have, again, I've never met a patient that suffers from anxiety that didn't have gut issues. So what I'm saying is you have this perfectly beautiful organism. You have these communities of trillions of cells. God gave us everything that we need to thrive. Everything that we need to thrive. The best research that is being done on the surface of Mother Earth right now is being done on the basics that God gave us. Magnetism from the earth, oxygen from the air, light from the sun, whole foods, minerals from like that you would get if you scooped water out of a flowing stream, grounding by discharging into the earth and changing the polarity of your body, repolarizing the surface of your blood cells, learning to actually allow sunlight into your eyes and to touch your skin. We're very photovoltaic beings. And so what happens when we start to disconnect from Mother Nature? What happens when we start to disconnect from what God gave us and replace it with what man made us? We get this is how we become sick and diseased and pathological. And the reason why I say that is that this whole ecosystem was meant to work as an entire ecosystem. You can't take pieces of it out and expect to maintain a state of optimal health. So, for example, if you look at our circulatory system, you don't. Very few people realize that only 30% of our blood is circulated by our heart. Right? Our heart's only responsible for 30% of the circulation in our body. 70% of our circulation is actually not done by the heart. 70% of our circulation is done by an activity called vasomotor. Okay, this is microvascular circulation. Nobody listening to this podcast has a heart that is strong enough in a single contraction to pump blood all the way to the tip of your toes, to the tip of your fingers, through all the capillaries in your brain, your liver, your lungs, your pancreas, your kidneys, none of us. What happens is we pump blood to the entrance of these capillaries, and then an activity called vasomotor takes over. Think of a snake swallowing a mouse. Okay, so what happens as we age to these capillaries, to this microvascular circulation? Well, as we deprive it of sunlight, which we very often do, it becomes deconditioned, if you will. You lose the vascular laxity. Blood flow begins to decrease. The reason why most people start wearing readers in their 50s is not because their eyesight is physically changing, but because the blood flow to the back of their eyes is changing. When we don't vary our temperature, right? Expose ourselves to cold temperatures, expose ourselves to hot temperatures. When we just keep our temperature perfectly normal, we stop exercising our vascular system. Our arteries are smooth muscle. They can actually contract and expand. We don't think about exercising our vascular system, but it's actually very good for you. One of the reasons why I love cold water exposure, taking a cold shower, getting in a cold plunge or a cold tub, is because you're exercising your vascular system. You're causing a peripheral vasoconstriction and a vasodilation, which is actually very, very good for maintaining this microvascular circulation. But we just maintain our body temperature and air temperature and our car temperature and our temperature in our office and our temperature in our home, because we don't like to be uncomfortable. We got to stop telling grandma not to go outside, it's too hot, not to go outside, it's too cold, just to lay down, just to relax, just to eat at the very first pang of hunger. This is collapsing all of our natural defense mechanisms. And so one of the reasons, getting back to evolution, is you look at how this human body is structured, and you see that, for example, an artery will have a certain diameter, and it carries this warm oxygenated blood away from the heart. And then wrapped around this artery, comprising the same diameter, but divided into smaller little pipes, are the veins. And the veins are smaller in diameter, and they're wrapped around the artery to improve the heat exchange. And so you start digging into this, and you're like, this is like the most sophisticated engineer in the world designed this system. Because the warm fluid that's leaving changes the temperature of the cool fluid that's coming back. And the way you change the temperature is you divide the same diameter into smaller pipes and you wrap it around this other pipe. You don't see arteries and veins like this. You see artery and veins like this. And so and I could give you 1,000 examples of this. It's just incredible how the body can, when you fast, for example, your body goes into the state called autophagy, where it actually starts to eat cells that are useless in the body. It recycles them, right? You look at any faith in the world, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindu, you look at any major religion in the world, they all have periods of fasting. And they have periods of fasting because fasting wasn't just to deprive you of, pleasures of the flesh. It was to heal you. It was actually designed, when we didn't have the medications that we have today, it was designed to cleanse and heal the body. Because when you go into a fasted state, this miraculous condition starts to emerge where your body efficiently sends the immune system out into the world, and it starts to eat the useless cells in your body and break them apart into the amino acids that we use other places for energy.
No
it's
kidding.
so incredibly efficient. It's like, like the greatest PhD chemist in the world designed the chemical component. The greatest architectural engineer in the world designed the architecture of it. The structure of it is so incredible. If you look at how we take the same minerals and create bone, calcium, phosphorus, form hydroxyapatite, create this bone, and then we warehouse a factory inside the bone that creates the red blood cells, and the red blood cells are responsible for shuttling the gases around in the body. And this ecosystem is so intelligent, and it couldn't, not in my opinion, but in the scientific evidence, it could not have been put together by accident. It didn't happen by happenstance. And don't tell me about genetic evolution, because, genetically, we've been told things like, we pass disease from generation to generation, which is, in most cases, is patently false. Like, you have a lot of listeners right now that you will either have type 2 diabetes, or they'll have hypothyroid, or they'll have high blood pressure, or they'll have drug and alcohol addiction runs in their family, or depression and anxiety runs in their family. And they have been told that these are genetically inherited diseases, right? Because something runs in families does not mean it's genetically inherited. This is another farce that has been promulgated on the populace, because if I can convince you that you have a genetically inherited disease, I can convince you that you need to subscribe to a lifetime of medication. So you come in to see me as your doctor, and I look at your blood pressure, and I go, Shawn, you have high blood pressure. You go, well, why do I have high blood pressure? I go, well, I don't know. You have a normal EKG, you have a normal EEG, you have normal heart sounds, you have normal lung sounds, you have a normal dye contrast study. I did all these tests on your heart, and there's nothing wrong with your heart. Why do I have high blood pressure? Well, because your grandfather had it, or your uncle had it. So it's familial. It's genetically inherited. The next time a physician says that to you, you need to look them dead in the face and say, what gene did I inherit from my ancestor that gave me that condition? Watch their face go blank. Because things run in families does not mean that you have a genetic disease. What we pass from generation to generation is, for the most part, is not disease. It is habits and nutrient deficiencies, both of which are fixable, right? Go to Google right now and say, what percentage of hypertension is idiopathic, meaning of unknown origin? 85%. You mean to tell me 85% of the time they diagnose you with high blood pressure, they have no idea what's causing it? That's exactly what I mean. So what do we do? In the 85% of cases where we don't know the origin of high blood pressure, we medicate the heart. What do we do in the 85% of cases that we don't know why you have hypothyroid? We medicate the thyroid. And so you want to talk about a pandemic in this country. We have a pandemic of holding organs responsible for crimes they're not committing. So many people that are listening to this podcast right now either have high blood pressure or they have a loved one with high blood pressure. And the type of high blood pressure they were diagnosed with is idiopathic hypertension, unknown origin hypertension. Then they were told because an ancestor had it, they inherited it. But there is no gene for that condition. So it cannot be genetic. And so the same thing happens with thyroid. We diagnose people with low thyroid, and I'm going to point this out on your labs. Generally, broadly, because they have low T3 hormone, right? So the thyroid makes two hormones, T4, and it makes T3. But the little known fact about the thyroid is that it only makes 20% of the T3 hormone in your blood. So if T3 is low, there's an 80% chance it's not your thyroid. But what do we do when T3 is low? We call it hypothyroid, and we medicate the thyroid. So the question should be, where's the other 80% come from? The other 80% comes from outside the thyroid. It's deiodinized in the liver, which is about 2/3 of the thyroid hormone T3. The rest of it comes from the gut and the periphery. But the point is, between the liver, the gut, and the periphery, this is outside of the thyroid. We just hold the thyroid responsible for a crime it's not committing, instead of looking at, well, what nutrients? Selenium, thiamine, zinc, which are very, very common, selenium, very common deficiencies in thyroid conditions. less often iodine. But before we look to see if the body has the right raw materials, the right nutrients, we assume disease and pathology. And now we're whacking a perfectly healthy organ, accusing it of a crime it's not committing, and people subscribe to a lifetime of the medication because they were told it's genetic, because their grandmother or their uncle or their aunt had it, and there's no gene to pass it on to them. And so these are the kinds of again, this brings me back to the discussion about faith, because God gave us everything that we need to thrive. If you can't find it on the surface of the earth, you probably don't need it to live a healthy, happy, long, thriving life, right? It's when we start picking up the things that God didn't give us. We start eating highly processed foods, glyphosates, preservatives, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, fake foods, dyes, the MSGs, the genetically modified foods, which are not even foods. And we start putting these non-natural compounds into the body. Now we become diseased and sick and pathological. And now we're relying on chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals to fix the pathology that was caused by the chemicals, the synthetics, and the pharmaceuticals. It's such a vicious cycle. But if we go back to what God gave us, meat, fish, chicken, eggs, vegetables, sunlight, grounding, breath work, exercise, nature, water that is free of, glyphosate and free of chlorine and free of fluoride and microplastics and pharmaceuticals, you'd find that we could fix this entire pandemic of chronic disease in the country. Just going back to what God gave us.
Wow. So you're not eating Bill Gates' fake meat?
His lab-grown meat. Italy banned that shit, man. It's crazy. I mean, stem cell grown meat. I mean, that's
pretty wild, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And now we want to blame greenhouse gases on cow farts, and I'm like, this is.
Well, that's a fascinating conversation we just had. I got a couple of questions. One was the fasting. I remember, I think we had lunch at your place for the podcast, and you were talking about. You had mentioned something about how fasting. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounded like fasting is great for fighting and or preventing cancer.
No question.
How so?
Well, because everyone listening to this podcast at some point in their lifetime, whether you've had cancer or not, has had cancer cells in your body. All cancer has the same origin. It was at one time a healthy cell, right? So it is the liver cell, lung cell, pancreatic cell, a brain cell. That cell's metabolism shifted, right? So it went from a healthy metabolism, which is usually using oxygen and to produce an energy source called ATP, spitting out carbon dioxide, healthy cellular metabolism. It's eliminating waste, it's repairing, it's detoxifying, it's regenerating, it's replicating. So that was at one time a healthy cell. Something happened to that cell that shifted its metabolism to being sick, if you will. It shifts to a different source of energy. Uses sugar, it uses acid, it creates acid as a byproduct. And so why is it that we think that a healthy cell can become a sick cell? Well, we don't think a sick cell can become a healthy cell. And so, the theory is that once a cell that was healthy now becomes sick, the only way to fix this cell is to kill this cell. Now, very often, there are forms of cancer that have what's called a DNA mismatch, where the immune system actually recognizes the cancer as a foreign body, and it begins to wage war on it. This is the whole basis for something called immunotherapies. We've had a lot of clients, and again, I am not a physician and I'm not an oncologist, so I want to make that perfectly clear, and I'm not recommending that you just fast if you have cancer, although I am recommending if you have cancer, you should fast, maybe not just only fast. But in the body, we can create an environment that's very hospitable for cancer. We can create an environment that's very inhospitable to cancer. So let's talk about a biome that is inhospitable to cancer. It's not really inviting cancer. Number one, it has fewer areas of focal hypoxia. It has few areas of the body that are deprived of oxygen. Healthy circulation, movement, sunlight, things like red light therapy. So we have healthy circulation, we have healthy levels of oxygen in the blood. The second thing is we don't have an environment that is very acidic. The pH range of the blood is very narrow, so about a half a point. As you get more towards the lower end of that scale, you get more acidic. As you get to the higher end of that scale, you get more alkaline. We know that alkaline environments tend to be disease-free environments. Acidic environments tend to be disease-prone environments. The other thing is we can talk about removing the unnecessary assaults on our cellular biology. So things like pesticides, herbicides, glyphosates, insecticides, preservatives. So eating whole foods in their natural format, avoiding things like seed oils. And if you still don't believe the research on seed oils, Paul Saladino just did a great short documentary on it. Dr. McCullough has done lots of exposés on seed oils. The evidence on seed oils is absolutely valid, even though you will see that NIH research says that these polyunsaturated fatty acids are not bad for you, and you should be eating Wesson oil and corn oil and canola oil and safflower oil and sunflower oil and all of these seed oils that are highly toxic to our cellular biology. And very often, it's not even the origin of the seed itself, like a rapeseed or a canola, which is the same thing, or a sunflower or safflower seed. What we do is we take these canola plants or rapeseed plants, we put them in a commercial press, and the oil comes out very gummy. So we degum it with something called hexane, which is a neurotoxin. Then we take that neurotoxic degummed oil and we heat it to 405 degrees and we turn it rancid. Okay, so now you have a putrefied, rancid oil. So then we have to deodorize it. So we deodorize it with sodium hydroxide, which is a known carcinogen. And then we, in some cases, will even bleach it, then bottle it, then put it on the shelf. So sometimes it's not even the food, it's the distance from the food to the table. So if you're listening to this, I would make today the day you get seed oils completely out of your diet. It's very hard to do. Sunflower, safflower, canola, rapeseed, and I would replace those with 4 or 5 different oils. If you're cooking, use coconut oil, which can take high temperatures. Use grass-fed or ghee butter or tallow. All of those are stable at high temperatures. And then at room temperature, use either an avocado oil or an extra virgin olive oil. Those are the only fats and oils you need in your house. You can make everything with those. You can cook everything with those. You're safe. They're from nature. And they don't denature at high temperatures. When you take these seed oils and you put them in deep fryers and you start frying foods in these, you get all kinds of carcinogenic compounds that just spike inflammation in the body. And so, I would, if you're listening to this, I mean, I would make seed oils one of the things that you tap water and seed oils get out of your life, and your inflammatory cascade will come down in your body.
I'll start doing that.
And I hate to sound like such a fear monger, but the truth is, because we started this whole conversation about evolution, the fear is just trying to get back around the system to get back to the basics. Right? That's what it is. There's a lack of fear in whole foods and the basics. Fruits, vegetables, meat, fish, chicken, eggs from whole food sources. When we take those things and put them through the industrial process before they hit the table, this is where things go wrong, right? Cattle are not meant to eat soybean oil and high fructose corn syrup. They don't encounter these things in nature. They don't take steroids, they don't take antibiotics, they don't get vaccinated. But when you look at commercial feedlots, if you've ever seen an aerial picture of a commercial feedlot, there is not one blade of grass on the ground. Those cattle are standing in 4 inches of mud, and I'm not kidding you, just Google it, you'll see images of these. Thousands and thousands of acres, as far as the eye can see, they're standing in mud. Very often they're eating grains, which they don't encounter. They're eating soybean. They're eating, and even in some cases, high fructose corn syrup. Sometimes their teeth are rotted all the way up to the gum by the time they're slaughtered. Lots of them are dying of type 2 diabetes right before they're slaughtered. But if you take a cow and it's on a pasture and it's eating 6 or 8 different varieties of grass and cloves, and it's eating the grass from the top down where the most nutritious part of the plant is, and it's living for 6 or 7 or 8 years before it's slaughtered, and it's a full grown animal. These are highly nutritious, whole food sources, instead of the commercially processed versions of these. So you have a big veteran population. A lot of these veterans, sadly, are struggling with mental conditions as a part of their service to our country. And then they come back and they're put on the pharmaceutical hamster wheel, but nobody's telling them, how do I get the neural inflammation out of my brain? How do I restore my mood and my emotional state to normal? Nobody's talked to me about fixing my gut to get my neurotransmitters right so my mood stabilizes. Nobody's actually talked to me about getting seed oils and these processed foods out of my diet to reduce the amount of inflammation in my brain that could be causing the chronic migraines that I have, the ruminating thoughts, nibbling away at my sleep, making me feel like I'm actually losing my mind. A lot of these men and women are not as sick or diseased or as mentally ill as they have been led to believe. They don't need chemical intervention in their brain. They need a reduction of the inflammatory process that is causing that to exist. And I'm not saying that in every case, and I'm not by any means poo-pooing therapy or counseling or any of those things. I think that I think they all have their place. But if you're not talking to these clients and patients about getting these compounds that incite inflammation out of their body and fixing their gut so they can create the neurotransmitters that manufacture healthy mood and healthy emotion, we're missing an entire gap in how we could treat them, right? Yeah. They develop dopamine deficiencies, which is the genesis of addiction. The absence of dopamine is the presence of addiction. What happens when people's dopamine gets low? They engage in dopamine-seeking behavior, nicotine, alcohol, promiscuity, gambling, risky behaviors, what have you. But they're actually not seeking the high, like we talked about earlier, they're seeking the normalcy. All these people just seek normalcy. Very few addicts are like, I wake up and just want to get really banged up. They wake up and want to feel normal. What is causing the absence of normalcy? Deficiencies in dopamine, imbalances in neurotransmitters. Where do the majority of these come from? Gut issues.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, I think about cancer scares the shit. It's probably my biggest fear. And it's like every day somebody else got cancer, somebody died of cancer, somebody's mom got cancer, somebody's brother got, it's every day. I hear it, and it's running rampant amongst veterans. And we're getting all these weird cancers. And I just think about, I spent 14 years in and out of war zones and breathing in, Kabul, Afghanistan it's in a big valley surrounded by mountains. How do those people keep warm? They burn tires all winter long, breathing that shit. I remember spitting in the sink and my fucking spit was black. Water bottles sitting out in 110, 115 degree weather in Iraq. Plastic water bottles, and drinking that for 14 years and the jammers. Now it's coming out. Well, of course, the government's suppressing this, but of course, the jammers being the things that disrupt the signals to trigger an IED. It'll block any cell phone radio transmissions, anything like that, which could detonate an IED. Now they're saying that
ionizing
potentially
radiation.
that is causing. That's why so many veterans are getting brain cancer, because they've been running jammers, just sitting there while it's pulsing, and then, all the ordnance, the explosions, everything. That's why I was asking about, that's why I'm so interested in blood filtration and plasma exchange to see if I can get some of this heavy metals and all this shit out of my body that.
Well, you know what a lot of these guys should be doing? Because, first of all, plasma exchange is amazing. These blood filtrations are amazing. I'll put links to places that they can get both. Right now, I have no affiliation with them. I've actually done them myself. I'm a big believer, but they are very often outside of the price point for a lot of people. So what can people do that are listening to this podcast to activate their natural detox pathways and materially reduce the risk of cancer? Number one, like we talked about, just getting tap water out of your diet. But number two, our natural detoxification pathways, like sweat, for example, regular sauna sessions. Not only, the evidence on dry saunas is in. I mean, an extension in all-cause mortality, a reduction in cardiovascular risk, a reduction in cancer risk, significant reductions in autoimmune conditions. And why is this? Because the skin can be used as a secondary route of waste elimination. And so regular sauna sessions, 20 minutes minimum 3 times a week. They have saunas now that are, that are inexpensive enough that you don't even have to have the big, cedar room. They have saunas you can sit in. They have single saunas that you can get online. My preference is dry saunas. That's where most of the evidence is sitting in a dry sauna, activating those pathways. Taking things like glutathione, liposomal or transdermal glutathione. Glutathione is the most powerful antioxidant in the human body. It resides inside of every single cell in our bodies. There's not one cell in your body that does not contain glutathione. This is an antioxidant that's actually made by the liver, and it's called the mother of all antioxidants. We actually can do intracellular tests for the level of glutathione and tell exactly when a cell is going to die by its intracellular level of glutathione. It's that linked to cellular health. So you can supplement with glutathione. You can do it via IV drips. There is a transdermal glutathione that you can spray, that you can rub through the skin, which has the right folded proteins to go through the blood and through the skin and into the bloodstream. And doing regular sauna sessions. These are all ways for us to decrease our susceptibility to cancer. I also think, although there's not a direct clinical study stating this, drinking hydrogenated water and reducing the inflammation in the body also makes us less prone to cancer. If you actually want to look at, and you can repeat this at home, you can order a $6 ORP meter from Amazon. It's called an ORP meter, oxidative reduction potential. What this meter will do, if you put it in a glass of water or any kind of fluid, is it will tell you what the potential is of that fluid to reduce oxidation, to lower inflammation. I think I showed you this at my house.
You did.
So you take this little meter, you run tap water. That's going to be like plus 140, 160, right? Meaning it's going to cause inflammation. You take filtered water, it's still going to be plus 110, 120. It's also going to cause inflammation. You take and add hydrogen gas to the water, and it will drop to minus 600, meaning...
Minus 600?
Minus 600. So if you take that little hydrogen water bottle that we were drinking out of, and you fill it with bottled water, and you put the ORP meter in there, you'll see it'll be about plus 110, plus 120. As soon as you turn the hydrogen gas on, it will drop to minus 600. So it is 7 times more reducing of oxidation. So when something is reducing oxidation, reducing inflammation, what is it doing? It's neutralizing something that's causing inflammation. So when you put hydrogen water into the body, the hydrogen gas into the body, it's reducing inflammation. So adding hydrogen water, regular sauna sessions, glutathione is an excellent supplement for people that are worried about detoxification. The primary problem that most people have when they detox from anything, mold or viruses or heavy metals, is the body's detoxification processes are not working. So they take something to detox or cleanse themselves. The body dumps all this stuff into the bloodstream and they get sick as the devil. Well, that's why you want to be doing regular sauna, regular glutathione, regular exercise, lots of hydration. Get the body's natural detoxification processes working. And these are things that everybody can do. Like folks that don't have the money to go out and buy a cold plunge, just start taking Tupperware containers in your kitchen, fill them with water, put them in your freezer at night, take it out the next morning, you'll have a block of ice, put that in your tub and swirl it around, and in 25 minutes, 30 minutes, you'll have a perfect cold plunge. You don't even have to go to 7-Eleven and spend, whatever, $4 buying a bag of ice, which gets expensive if you're doing that every day too. And just keep rotating these Tupperware containers through your freezer and putting them into your tub. Start changing the temperature of your body. Apply a hormetic stress. Stress the body so that it strengthens. Get your circulation, working. And you can do this if you're deconditioned too. People that are handicapped or have reduced mobility, exposing yourself to sauna, exposing yourself to cold temperatures, changing the temperature of the body, mimicking this level of circulation, increasing the heart rate without moving a lot. You can be in a wheelchair and go into a sauna and your heart rate will rise. right? Some of the best research ever done on what's called multi-step oxygen therapy, or EWAT, exercise with oxygen therapy. I think it was Dr. Otto Warburg. This research was done by taking deconditioned people. I do this with my parents 3 times a week, putting them in a sauna, allowing that to raise the heart rate, and having them breathe a little bit of oxygen, and just from a nasal cannulus. And what this does, the perfusion pressure of the increased heart rate gets this out into the periphery, gets their circulation working. Get oxygen to the brain, get oxygen to the tissues. That's the enemy of cancer. You know, healthy circulation and oxygen, and a low sugar environment, low glycemic environment, and a relatively high pH environment in the blood, higher end of the pH scale for the blood. That's a cancer-free environment.
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know everybody out there has to be just as frustrated as I am when it comes to the BS and the rhetoric that the mainstream media continuously tries to force feed us. And I also know how frustrating it can be to try to find some type of a reliable news source. It's getting really hard to find the truth and what's going on in the country and in the world. And so one thing we've done here at Shawn Ryan Show is we are developing our newsletter. And the first contributor to the newsletter that we have is a woman, former CIA targeter. Some of you may know her as Sarah Adams, call sign Superbad. She's made 2 different appearances here on the Shawn Ryan Show. And some of the stuff that she has uncovered and broke on this show is just absolutely mind-blowing. And so I've asked her if she would contribute to the newsletter and give us a weekly intelligence brief. This is going to be all things terrorists, how terrorists are coming up through the southern border, how they're entering the country, how they're traveling, what these different terrorist organizations throughout the world are up to. And here's the best part, the newsletter is actually free. We're not going to spam you. It's about 1 newsletter a week, maybe 2 if we release 2 shows. The only other thing that's going to be in there besides the intel brief is if we have a new product or something like that. But like I said, it's a free CIA intelligence brief. Sign up. Links in the description or in the comments. We'll see you in the newsletter. All right, Gary, we're back from the break. And so I did I gave a bunch of blood when I was down there for your podcast, and we're going to go over that. And I'm a little nervous, but
you're doing fine.
You going to give me a life estimation?
Yeah, I'm not going to predict your life expectancy.
All right,
I've only done that once since I left that career, and that was for Dana White. But I will tell you how you're going to live a longer, healthier, happier life. You're not bad at all. You're not bad at all. First off, when we look at blood work, I want to preface this by saying I'm not a physician. I'm not licensed to practice medicine. I don't want to give anybody medical advice. It's also important to just note for the podcast that a licensed physician did meet with you before the podcast. Dr. Carrie Sarda went through your blood. The recommendations I'm going to talk about are her recommendations, and she is a licensed to practice medicine. What I would prefer to do is talk about how do you read these? How do you interpret a lot of these numbers? What should people look for in their blood work? What should they be asking their doctor to look at? Blood work is excellent because blood gives you data. And it's hard to put any kind of actionable plan in place until you have data, right? And most people, when I talk to them, I speak at a lot of conferences, stage talks, podcasts, whatever. If you ask people what's more important, your business or your health, 99% of them will say my health. If you ask them what's more important to you, money or your health, your wellness, your well-being, they'll say my well-being, my health. But then when you really dig deep and you go, well, do you own your own business? Yeah. What did your business make last month? Oh, $622,000. So what was your net profit? $779,400. How many employees do you have? 17. What's your average revenue per employee? $58,400 per head. Okay. What's your hemoglobin A1C? Blank. Where's your testosterone? Blank. What's your vitamin D3 level? No idea. So you realize very quickly that while they think they prioritize their health, they really don't. People have been guilted, in my opinion, into thinking that being selfish. Like putting themselves first is very selfish. It's actually very selfless. I really encourage people, and I do this as a practice, to give yourself a certain time during the day. So for me, the first 90 minutes of every single day belongs only to me. It doesn't belong to my family. It doesn't belong to my spouse, my clients, my career, my partners, no one. It belongs only to me. After that 90 minutes, I give the rest of my day away. So I really cater to my wife. I cater to my kids. I cater to my business, my clients. I have a lot of private clients, and I really pour myself into them. But my staff knows that all of my meetings and travel get scheduled around sleep and exercise. Well, I didn't get here today until 10 o'clock this morning, but I got up at 6:30 this morning. I flew in last night at a decent hour so I could get decent sleep. So I prioritize my meetings and travel around sleep and exercise, and always the first 90 minutes of my day belongs to me. This morning I did some breath work, I got some sunlight, I had a really good breakfast, and I went down to the gym and got a 60-minute workout at the gym. I think if people just made that one shift in their life, because and veterans for some reason are especially prone to this. It's called caregiver syndrome. It's where they prioritize the needs of everybody else in their life ahead of their needs. And I think this might stem from the training, where when I'm certain in SEAL training, and I don't pretend to have any view into that, but very myopically, if you're thinking about the needs of your comrades first, and they're thinking about your needs first, that's an excellent recipe for survival. But in the real world, we have to prioritize ourselves. And putting yourself first is not selfish. It's very selfless. And so the best place to start is with the blood work, right? Because what's not in your blood is somebody else's opinion. And if you ask an opinion about why you're not sleeping, why you have weight gain, water retention, depression, anxiety, poor sleep, any number of things, you're going to get 1,000 different opinions. This will only tell one story. It will only give you a fact pattern. And there's 3 things you should look at in your blood work. You should look at your hormone balance, your glycemic profile, how well are you controlling your blood sugar, which is your glucose, your hemoglobin A1C, and your insulin. And you should look at nutrient deficiencies. I'm going to point those out in here, specifically vitamin D3, B12, some of the big ones, DHEA. So when you look at blood work, and hopefully this will be up on the screen, it usually starts with something called the CBC, which stands for complete blood count. So this is where we go into the contents of your blood and we count up the contents of your blood. How many white blood cells do you have? How many red blood cells do you have? So in your case, your white blood cell count is in the normal range, which is great. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But at the top of this, you see that we're starting to look at how well you control your blood sugar. First thing we look at is fasting glucose. So your fasting glucose is 99. It's a little on the high side. But the most important one is this one right here, hemoglobin A1C. This is the 3-month average of your blood sugar. If you ate a box of donuts the morning you took this blood, it wouldn't have moved this number. If you fasted for 2 days before you did this blood work, it wouldn't move this number. It's a 3-month average. You really want this number to be around 5.2 or lower.
What is it?
5.5. At 5.6, you become pre-diabetic. 44% of this country is pre-diabetic. 18% of teenagers have prediabetes. And so, I'm sorry, 44% of teenagers have prediabetes, 18% of teenagers have fatty liver disease. So if you want to talk about what is the most controllable factor in our lives, and that is the biggest contributor to all forms of disease and pathology, it would be rampantly uncontrolled blood sugar. And it is silent, and you don't feel it, and it causes you to overeat, causes you to gain weight, causes you to retain water. It causes an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, causes inflammation, all kinds of things. So hemoglobin A1C is the 3-month average of our blood sugar. And then in the latter part of your labs, you'll see insulin. Your insulin is right down in the low single digits at 6.3. That's good. You're not insulin resistant. You are insulin sensitive. So what are a couple of ways that I could go about lowering the 3-month average of my blood sugar? There's a route that you can take called berberine, which has actually been shown in similar side-by-side clinical trials to be as effective, if not more effective, than metformin, which is what they give to type 2 diabetics. to control blood sugar. You aren't at the place where you need medication or anything. Berberine would be excellent for you to take with meals. The other thing to do is to watch your high glycemic foods. High glycemic foods are foods that you eat that are not the obvious sugary sweet foods that actually spike your blood sugar. Ideally, you want your sugar to look like rolling hills throughout the day. Most people's sugar looks like a heart monitor, okay? When your sugar spikes, your insulin spikes. When your sugars fall, you get very hungry. On the way down, we trigger hunger. So the more your blood sugar travels, the hungrier you are more often, the more you overeat. This is why people that eat the most sugar have the highest blood fat. People that eat the most sugar have a tendency to gain weight the easiest. The other thing that happens when we eat a lot of high glycemic foods, what are high glycemic foods? Like white flour, white rice, white bread, pasta, potatoes, and then the obvious cakes, cookies, pastries, pies, brownies, the obvious ones that taste really sweet. The ones that aren't so obvious are the breads and the pastas and the rices and things that we eat a lot of that we don't combine with proteins that spike our blood sugar. So I tell people for 10 weeks, just try to get the whites out of your diet. Flour, rice, bread, pasta, white potatoes, sweet potatoes are fine, and then the obvious sugars out of your diet. The other thing you can do is take berberine, which is a root, which helps really is very, very good at controlling blood sugar. So lowering your hemoglobin A1C is one of the best ways to put yourself in a state of reducing all kinds of consequences down the road. The other thing that is excellent for blood sugar is muscle mass. The sponge for glucose in the body is your muscles. Our muscles are a sponge for sugars. The more muscle mass you have, the better you are absorbing and maintaining and controlling your blood sugar. People that are very frail, very susceptible to type 2 diabetes, to rampantly high blood sugar. So there's actually some evidence that instead of doing one 45-minute walk in the morning, 3 15-minute walks spread throughout the day right after meals is better at controlling your blood sugar than that. A lot of things that we can do that we have control over, like eating a meal and going for a 15-minute walk, are really recipes for longevity. As you move down your blood work here and you see this little section here looking at your kidneys, you'll see something called BUN, creatinine, and EGFR. This is looking at your kidney health. Blood urea nitrogen and creatinine, for lack of better words, they're kind of the kidney waste products that you want to filter out of the blood. You don't like to see these rising in the blood. In your case, they're not. So your kidneys are doing a good job filtering the blood. The question is, how much stress are the kidneys under? And you can get that number from something called EGFR. This is your glomerular filtration rate. This tells you the rate at which blood is moving through your kidneys. Okay? The higher the filtration rate, the faster the blood's moving through your kidneys. So think about this. The full volume of blood in your body goes through your kidneys 15 times every day. What happens if your kidneys get inflamed or irritated? You have inflammation. The filtration rate slows down. As the filtration rate slows down, the poison level rises. So your kidneys are actually very, very healthy. One of the secrets to maintaining healthy kidneys is just staying properly hydrated, controlling your blood pressure. So this is why I tell people you got to hydrate and mineralize your first thing in the morning. 10 ounces of water, quarter teaspoon of Baja Gold sea salt. Then you get your electrolytes. So what's really interesting about these is very often when your sodium levels get too low, below 136, I have seen very often in our clinic system, patients complain of regular morning headaches. There's an interesting study I'll put the link to below on migraine headaches, which found an inverse relationship between sodium and migraine headaches. What does this mean? That as sodium levels went down, the frequency of migraine headaches went up. I've seen this in hundreds of my clients where I actually give them mineral sea salts in the morning and their migraine headaches go away. I'm not saying every migraine headache is related to sodium deficiency. But when you think about it, if you have a headache, okay, where is that coming from? It's not coming from your brain. There are no pain receptors in the brain. The brain is not capable of transmitting a pain signal. So when you actually have a headache, it's not coming from behind your eye or from the brain's temporal or occipital or frontal lobes. It's not coming from the brain. Where's it coming from? It's coming from the covering of the brain. It's called the dura. The dura hates two things. It hates being stretched and it hates being contracted. What determines whether or not it's stretching or contracting? Sodium gradient. We have been taught to fear sodium. We've been told sodium is very dehydrating. Nothing could be further from the truth, okay? Not iodized table salt. I'm not talking about that junk. I'm talking about a good mineral salt, like a Baja Gold salt. And why is that? Well, just think about it this way. If you were so dehydrated right this moment that you landed in the emergency room, the very first thing they would give you is a saline IV. Why would they give you saline if it's dehydrating? Well, because it's not. If you had life-threateningly high blood pressure and you called 911, when the paramedics arrived to your house, they would start a bag of IV fluids and they would squeeze saline fluid into your bloodstream to lower your blood pressure. So the fear of salt, in my opinion, is misguided. And this will tell you where your sodium is so you don't have to guess. Your sodiums get low, adding a mineral salt is excellent. You can also see your magnesium levels, your potassium levels here. Those are super easy things to supplement with. So yours are all within range. When you get down here and you see this word alkaline phosphatase, for lack of better words, is a liver waste product. So we don't like to see this rise in the blood either. The liver should be keeping this level at the low end of the range. So your alkaline phosphatase levels are fine, but when I look at the liver enzymes, they're elevated. So liver enzymes, alanine, transaminase, AST and ALT are liver enzymes. So what does this mean? How irritated or how inflamed is the liver? So one of the supplements that Dr. Sartor recommended for you is milk thistle, selenium. Maybe we could even put the supplements she recommended right in the show notes. So if people have these kinds of conditions, the other thing that's really good for elevated liver enzymes is glutathione, the master antioxidant in the human body. The liver makes glutathione. It's the master antioxidant in the body. It resides in every single cell in the human body. And when the liver gets stressed, it reduces its production of glutathione. So the milk thistle and the liver support that she's putting you on from Thorne, it's a company called Thorne, which I have no affiliation with, should help to address this slight amount of inflammation that you've got in the liver.
Well, what would be causing that inflammation?
So the main offender is alcohol. I know that's not the offender in you. But the main offender for liver inflammation is alcohol, because it's not the alcohol itself, it's what the alcohol becomes. Alcohol is converted into something called acetaldehyde, which makes your blood pH very low, very acidic, and this irritates the liver. But don't forget, the liver's filtering out everything. The liver is like, if you want any organ on Team Ryan, you want the liver. Right? It can take over the function of other organs. It makes cholesterol. It breaks up amino acids. It takes sugar out of the blood and stores it as a storage form of sugar called glycogen. It can take stored sugar, turn it back into sugar, and put actual glucose into the blood. If you're low on blood sugar, it can actually feed sugar into the blood by taking stored sugar called glycogen through a process called gluconeogenesis. It can create sugar. This is filtering out pharmaceuticals, acetaminophen, Tylenols, ibuprofens are very difficult on the liver. Lots of pharmaceutical compounds put pressure on the liver. And then, of course, all of the major offenders like the seed oils and the highly processed foods put a lot of pressure on the liver to filter those things out. Pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, glyphosates, preservatives. This is why I tell people, try to shop the perimeter of your grocery store. Stay out of the aisles as much as you can, because that's where you're going to get the processed nonsense. And as soon as you have any amount of financial flexibility in your budget, just start to buy organic, right? As much as you can.
Mm-hmm. Did you say sugar too? The liver?
Sugar, not so much of an offender for liver enzymes. That's going to raise your hemoglobin A1C. What sugar will do is actually cause your cholesterol levels to rise. So think about this. When we eat sugar or things that raise our blood sugar very quickly, which people know that sugar is the offender, but they don't think about like the breads and the pastas and the cereals and the grains and the things that don't taste sweet but spike your blood sugar. So when your blood sugar rises, insulin rises. The thing about insulin is the majority of people think that the primary role of insulin is to lower blood sugar. That's actually not true. The primary role of insulin, although it does lower blood sugar, it allows blood to go into the cell. One of the things that insulin does, as its primary role, is it blocks any other form of energy use in the body. So what does this mean? This means when insulin is high, you cannot burn fat. So if you've eaten a high sugar and high fat meal and your insulin spikes, what's happening to that fat? Where does the fat go? It goes into the bloodstream. It shows up in the bloodstream as a triglyceride. High blood fat and high cholesterol is a recipe for disaster. Low blood fat and high LDL cholesterol is a recipe for longevity. So in other words, if I want to maintain healthy levels of cholesterol, I want to maintain low levels of triglyceride, blood fat. The way I lower my triglycerides is I lower the amount of sugar. Sugar is the enemy, man. I'm telling you, the Bible should say sugar is the root of all evil, not the love of money. Because people are not dying because they love money. They are dying from blood sugar. And it kills you slowly over time.
So for me, with the liver, it would probably be
We're going to put you on liver.
processed foods.
Yep, highly processed foods. Yep, highly processed foods. A form of vitamin B12 called cyanocobalamin can be very irritating to the liver. We put a lot of shit on our skin that not only disrupts our hormones, but it also has to be filtered out by the liver. Everything from colognes and shampoos and conditioners to all kinds of cheap lotions, sunscreens that we put on our skin. As that stuff enters our bloodstream, the liver has to filter it out. So if you reduce the toxic load on your body, you reduce the toxic load on the liver. So hydrogen water, the supplement we're going to put you on with the milk thistle and some other herbs to really ease the liver. Glutathione is excellent for your liver. These are very inexpensive supplements that people can get right over the counter. Your iron looks good. You have healthy amounts of iron in your blood. It's also binding to the right sites very well. Your total iron, there's something here called TIBC, total iron binding capacity. I kind of think of this level as a dump truck. As you empty out a dump truck, right? Its capacity actually goes up. So as you reduce the iron, as you use it up, then your total iron binding capacity increases. As you empty out the bed of the truck has more capacity. So your levels of iron in your blood are fine. Most men don't have iron deficiency. Women very often, especially if they have heavy menstrual cycle, will sometimes need to supplement with something called iron bisglycinate, which is an iron supplement that helps negate the effects of heavy menstruation. Men, for the most part, shouldn't be taking iron. It has a tendency to build up in their bloodstream, not the opposite. You got a little bit of excess B12 here. It's usually not something to worry about. B12 is a metal, light metal in the body. It's also water soluble, so you have a tendency to urinate it out. And what is your D3 level here? 30? Wow, 99. That's actually not bad at all. So vitamin D3, this is another one that you should have. If you're watching this podcast right now, you want to get your D3 level checked. Functional ranges for D3 are between 60 and 80 nanograms per deciliter. Lots and lots and lots of research on this. that 60 to 80 nanograms per deciliter is the optimal range for vitamin D3. There are studies that link this to reduced incidence of breast cancer in women. It's linked to all kinds of improvements in immune function. The range is from 30 to 100. Most people are actually below 30, but your doctor will tell you if you're at 30.1 that you're good, but that's not true. You don't want to just be normal. You want to be in the optimal range. So that's 60 to 80 nanograms. So here's something that's going to sound really controversial. So your cholesterol is 238, which most physicians are going to consider high. This is where I'm going to run into a lot of conflict. Your LDL cholesterol is 170, but your triglycerides are just over 100. So very often, and this isn't a full cholesterol panel, it's not the amount of cholesterol in your blood that matters. It's the size of the cholesterol molecule. Most people think more cholesterol, more cardiovascular disease. That is not necessarily true. Higher LDL cholesterol on its own is not the link to cardiovascular disease. If you have high LDL cholesterol and high triglycerides, this is very bad. Keeping your triglycerides low and the particle size of LDL cholesterol large, this is a recipe for longevity. There are also other markers that were not tested in here, lipo-A, lipo-B, which I won't get into on the podcast. But in general, you want low triglycerides, below 149, and slightly elevated levels of LDL cholesterol. This, in our mortality space, was a marker for longevity. The people that lived the longest had low triglycerides and high LDL cholesterol.
Is that what I have?
Yep, that's exactly what you have. Your HDL cholesterol, your high-density lipoprotein, which tells me you're getting healthy fats. You're not afraid of avocados, coconut oil, olive oil, nuts, probably grass-fed butter. I can see those things in your diet. That's your healthy, high-density lipoprotein. That's your healthy levels of cholesterol. Your numbers are excellent. So I mean, dude, overall, you're doing well. We want to try to control the blood sugar a little bit. It'd be nice to lower your it would be nice to lower your hemoglobin A1C. Here's a couple other interesting markers. This one is called C-reactive protein. It's generally considered a marker for cardiovascular risk. If you're above 3, you have a high risk. If you're between 2 or 1 and 3, you have a moderate risk. If you're below 1, you have a very low risk. Well, you're at 0.47. That's great. C-reactive protein, if you're listening to this podcast, you should have your C-reactive protein checked. It's a non-specific marker of inflammation. It's kind of the liver's reaction to inflammation somewhere in the body. It doesn't tell you exactly where it's coming from, but you can take a deeper dive if this number is high. One of the things that we've found in our clinical practice to lower C-reactive protein is using something called a gut binder. Activated charcoal, silica clay, or a zeolite binder. Those things have a tendency to get into the gut and absorb histamines, absorb inflammatory factors, and help carry them out. We've seen very good results. Again, I'm not a physician. I can just tell you what we've seen in our clinical practice. Using gut binders, activated charcoal, silica clay, zeolite binders has had a very positive effect in my experience observing patients in our clinical practice. This is the silent one that nobody looks at. Homocysteine. We really want homocysteine to be in the single digits. And what is homocysteine? This is one of the easiest markers for you to control. And so many people have high homocysteine and they're suffering because of it. Homocysteine is an amino acid. It's in everybody's blood. As it's cruising by the inside lining of the artery, if it gets too high, it irritates the artery. When you irritate an artery, it clamps down. And if you make the pipes smaller in a fixed system, that system is fixed, right? So if I make the pipes smaller, pressure goes up. So is it possible that your blood pressure is high, not because there's something wrong with your heart, but because you have this elevated amino acid? The research says yes, because if I make the pipes smaller, my pressure goes up. And now I'm medicating my heart when really I could take an amino acid called trimethylglycine, which we're putting you on, TMG. This amino acid helps the body metabolize homocysteine. As homocysteine drops, there's a lot of evidence that it relaxes the arterial and vascular system and pressure returns to normal. This is what happened in Dana White when we treated Dana White. His blood pressure was really high, nothing wrong with the heart, lowered this insanely high level of homocysteine, and his blood pressure returned to normal. Again, I'm not saying that's the only reason for high blood pressure, but you should have that number checked because it's very, very easy to treat. Homocysteine is linked to increased, headaches, poor circulation, poor eyesight, increased blood pressure. It causes endothelial damage. It causes damage to the lining of the artery. When you get damage to the artery, cholesterol shows up. Cholesterol shows up, you start getting the narrowing, but it's not because of cholesterol, it's because of the damage. So homocysteine is one of the simplest things that you can measure and very easy to control. So you're taking something called TMG for that.
And where am I at on that?
You're at 11.6. The high end of the range is 14.5. I see these in the 20s, high 20s, low 30s all the time. You really want this in the single digits.
Okay.
Right? Very easy to get down into the single digits. Then we get to thyroid. So here's what's interesting about thyroid. So just a quick lesson about the thyroid. The thyroid doesn't determine how much hormone it secretes. Okay, it has a boss, like almost everything in the body. The testicles don't decide how much testosterone they secrete. They have a boss. It's the same boss. It's the pituitary. So there's a master regulator up here, puppeteer, that's kind of controlling everything. So the pituitary sends a signal to the thyroid called thyroid stimulating hormone. Then the thyroid starts to produce two hormones, T4, I'm being a little simplified, T4 and T3. What these do is they control your metabolism, your body temperature. They regulate the amount of, the pituitary also regulates the amount of testosterone that your body produces. In women, it regulates their entire menstrual cycle through something called luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormone. It will move a woman through the 3 phases of their menstrual cycle. So the signal from the pituitary to the thyroid is fine. The question is, what is the thyroid doing? Well, it's producing these two hormones. It produces the majority, close to all, of the thyroid T4. It only produces 20% of the T3. The rest of that T3 is T4 converted into T3, which happens outside of the thyroid. This is what we talked about earlier, but it's important to know this, that it is deiodinized in the liver, the gut, and the periphery. So the majority of your T3 hormone is not produced by your thyroid. So when it is low, do not assume that your thyroid is dysfunctional. Assume you have deficiencies outside of the thyroid. Before you start taking thyroid medication and medicating the thyroid for a crime it didn't commit, try supporting healthy metabolism of thyroid T3 outside of the thyroid. So selenium, thiamine, iodine, all levels that you can check, methylated multivitamins, methylfolate. These are all excellent things to help with the process of creating this hormone outside the thyroid. I can't tell you how many thousands of patients have come through our clinic and thanked our doctors for fixing their thyroid. And the doctor has to remind them, I didn't fix your thyroid. There's nothing wrong with your thyroid. I fixed the turnover of T4 into T3 outside of your thyroid.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So very often, this happens in medicine. Blood pressure high, must be the heart. Can't find anything wrong with the heart, medicated anyway. Thyroid hormones low, must be the thyroid. Can't find anything wrong with the thyroid, medicated anyway. We follow this sequence of events very, very often. Mental illness, imbalance in neurotransmitters, medicated anyway. Don't fix the neurotransmitter imbalance, medicate. Blood viscosity is too high. Don't just do regular blood dumps, thin the blood chemically. So very often if we just get back to the basics and understand the physiology of the body, we can fix a lot of these things without having to rely on chemicals and synthetics. Some good news for you. Your prostate looks great. PSA, prostate-specific antigen, it's kind of a measure of the inflammation in the prostate. Lots of men have something called BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia, which is where you get inflammation in the prostate, get some urinary flow issues. Things that are great for this are turmeric, curcumin, lots of prostate supplements that are very, very good at reducing prostate inflammation. You do not have that. One of the things I caution people against is taking some of the oral forms of these medications like finasteride and Propecia, which a lot of men will take for male pattern baldness, but then it just kills their sex drive and it knocks out their libido. So they're trying to grow back their hair to attract the ladies, and then they can't get an erection or can't maintain an erection. So if you are taking Propecia or finasteride for male pattern baldness, just know that you can get it in liquid format and apply it directly to the scalp and not have so much of it go into your bloodstream. It's much better to apply topically, in my opinion, than it is to take it orally. It's designed to reduce the level of something called DHT, dihydrotestosterone, which binds to the hair follicle and chokes it out. So as we traverse down here a little further, there's a marker here called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor. Amongst other things, this is a secondary marker of growth hormone in your body. When this number gets low, instead of taking human growth hormone, you can actually take a peptide. There are legal and some FDA-approved peptides to raise your growth hormone level naturally. Remember when I said that when you produce hormones, usually there's a boss that determines how much hormone you produce. So growth hormone is produced by the pituitary, but the pituitary has a boss called the hypothalamus. And what it does is it turns the pituitary's production of growth hormone on and off. You can mimic this signal with a growth hormone peptide. These are amino acid peptides that will rewind your pituitary to a more youthful level of growth hormone secretion. They're generally considered safe. One of the oldest ones is called Sermorelin. I think it was first approved by the FDA in 1983. So we have decades of experience with these peptides. They're amino acids, they're metabolites, the body recognizes them. They have a tendency not to create a dependency, not to create tachyphylaxis, which is a desensitization response. I think they're generally considered to be safer than taking growth hormone from outside the body and putting it in. You can cycle them very safely, 5 days on, 2 days off, according to the research. So talk to your doctor if your IGF-1 is low about raising your own production of growth hormone from your own pituitary. I mean, I don't care what anybody tells you. There is no better hormone in the human body than one that the body produces on its own. And so if I can get you high on your own supply, rather than taking it from outside the body and putting it in, that's a win, right? You're already clearly on hormone therapy. Your body is behaving the way that it should because you raise testosterone, you raise free testosterone. The pituitary shuts down your own natural testicular production. How does it do that? It lowers these two hormones, luteinizing and follicle-stimulating hormone. So this is a very natural response that you like to see. As testosterone goes up, the pituitary turns the signal down. So that's what happened. You inject testosterone, pituitary turns the signal down. Perfectly normal response in the body. DHEA, believe it or not, this is another one that is really good to check because lots of men that have low levels of testosterone are clinically deficient in DHEA. DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone, is basically the precursor for testosterone. Amongst other things, we make testosterone from this compound. So when this is low, it can lead to low hormone levels, even though there's nothing wrong with your ability to make hormones. You just don't have the raw material to do it. So in men and women, DHEA is a great one to check. It's also super easy to supplement with. When you're on testosterone therapy, there are powerful compounds called aromatase inhibitors that they usually put you on to lower your production of estrogen, anastrozole, exemestane, other ones. But a very natural way to get estrogen out of a male or a female bloodstream without pharmaceuticals is something called DIM, D-I-M, diindolomethane. It is synthesized from cruciferous vegetables, synthesized from something called 3-indole carbinol in cruciferous vegetables. So Taking DIM, which is over the counter, if you have elevated estrogen or you're trying to control your estrogen, that's another thing to talk to your doctor about. Much safer than being on pharmaceuticals. All right, I know I'm throwing a lot at you. My wife says I just eat people's face, so I feel like face. She's like, literally, you just, I mean, God forbid you sit next to me on like a commercial play. I can eat your face. we actually flew from Miami to Dallas a while ago, and so my wife and my son and my daughter sat in the row of 3 seats behind me, and I sit down on the aisle seat in front of them, and there's a dude sitting in the middle seat. So I sit down, and I'm like, oh, hey, I'm just making small talk. I'm like, oh, what do you do? And he goes, oh, I'm a family medicine practitioner. I'm a sleep apnea specialist.
Oh, man.
I go, oh, are you? And my wife literally sandwiches her face between the seat, and she goes, he's going to eat your face. And I did, dude. I put the tray table down so he couldn't get out. I had a 3-ring binder. I'm holding out. I go, let me ask you a few questions, Doc. It was so funny. 3 hours, I just ate that poor dude's face. He actually wanted to work for me when the time it ended, so it ended up pretty good. Okay, last few things here, man. Another thing you want to look at on hormone panel, which is very often overlooked, is this guy right here. SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, stands for sex hormone binding protein. It does exactly what its name says it does. It is a protein that binds to sex hormones. Why is that important? Because when this rises in men and women, it inhibits the conversion of testosterone into free testosterone. And what it does is it makes it look like your hormone levels are low when they're not. You're producing adequate levels. It's just this nasty protein is binding to it and carrying it out of the bloodstream. They use SHBG as birth control in women. So, whenever you look at labs on a female that's on birth control, very often their SHBG is through the roof. Okay, that's normal. When that protein rises in a man, if they don't check it, they put them on hormone therapy unnecessarily because SHBG binds to the testosterone and basically carries it out of the bloodstream without it being utilized. So how do you lower SHBG? There's a couple ways to do it. One of the best ways that we found to lower SHBG is by taking the mineral boron. It's over the counter. Lots of supplement companies produce it. So our clinical team puts men that have high SHBG on boron. As their SHBG comes down, women too, the free testosterone rises. So it's almost like being put on hormone therapy because you get your own natural supply back. So when you do a hormone panel, you've got to look at luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, testosterone, free testosterone, DHEA, and SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. Because if you're not looking at those, you're only looking at the hormone, this is where very young men, 21, 22, 23-year-old men that should never be on testosterone get put on injectable testosterone. Now they're relying on it for the rest of their life, and they can't get their wife pregnant when it's time to have kids. Right?
Damn.
Because taking testosterone also lowers the sperm count, right? You think of the testicle as kind of like a yin and yang sign. One side produces sperm, one side produces testosterone. The pituitary usually drops the production of both in the presence of testosterone. So once you start injecting it, it lowers luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which lowers the production of testosterone and sperm, right? So one of the ways to avoid that is getting your SHBG checked. And then final thing here, man, your white blood cell count is in the normal range. I want to call your attention to the next levels here. RBC, hemoglobin, hematocrit. These are super important because remember I talked earlier about how your red blood cell count, this is what carries oxygen in your blood. Everything that you perceive about energy is nothing more than oxygen in your blood. If you told me, Gary, I had a lot of energy today, physiologically what you're saying is I had a lot of oxygen in my blood today. So if oxygen equals energy, which it does, if I want to raise your energy level, I need to raise your oxygen level. How do I do that? I improve the amount of red blood cells in the bloodstream, and I improve the amount of hemoglobin in the bloodstream. How do you do that? You restore testosterone levels to normal, and that will increase the production of red blood cells. I have hardly seen, I don't know if I could say I've never seen it, but very rarely have I seen a client that had very low levels of testosterone, clinically low levels of testosterone that did not have clinically low levels of red blood cell, and also complained of fatigue, exhaustion, poor short-term memory, poor focus and concentration. If you want the latest research, Google American Journal of Urology, which is considered the Bible for male endocrine therapy. Just put into the Google search engine, American Journal of Urology space testosterone. Scroll down to section 13, and it will say clinical guidelines for testosterone therapy. Read from 13 to 21. You will be sold on male hormone therapy. They dispel all the myths in this journal. It's a peer-reviewed clinical journal. All the research is cited there. Don't take my word for it. That low testosterone is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, not the other way around. Testosterone does not increase your risk or hormone therapy does not increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. Hormone therapy does not increase your risk of developing prostate cancer or exacerbating prostate cancer. It can improve erectile dysfunction, anemia, bone mineral loss, mood. All of that research is right in there between sections 13 and 21. Journal of American Urology, space testosterone. That's one of the most revered journals in the world, which is why I send people there. If you're a physician and you disagree with that, go to that journal and all the research is cited. So you want your red blood cell count to be in the upper end of the normal range. And then you want to keep an eye on hemoglobin, which is the fluid in the red blood cell. You want that towards the upper end of the range. And you keep an eye on something called hematocrit. Hematocrit is a measure of your blood's viscosity. It tells me how close is your blood to water or how close is your blood to motor oil. As your hematocrit rises, your blood is thickening. Easiest way to reduce the viscosity of the blood without blood thinners is to do regular blood donations. We call it therapeutic phlebotomy. If you are taking testosterone therapy, your doctor should probably be recommending that you do regular blood donations. This for men is very healthy. Right? If you look at the incidence of cardiovascular disease between men and women, you'll see that men lead women by a huge margin until women stop menstruating. Then there's a parabolic hockey stick spike and they begin to approximate men in the incidence of cardiovascular disease. Why is that? Because they stop turning their blood over, right? So doing regular blood donations for men is very healthy, unless you have something going on.
I'm not doing that. Does it show that I'm not doing that? I should be doing that.
Yes.
What is it? What is regular?
Every 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, your hematocrit is 50.2, which is considered pretty thick. At 51, you're 0.8 of a point away from being having clinically thick blood.
Okay.
Right, so from being clinically out of the range. What you will notice, you feel better right away.
Okay.
Lots of clinics will also, if you're one of those people that gets lightheaded from donating blood, you're not getting lightheaded from the loss of blood. You're getting lightheaded from the loss of pressure because the amount of pressure in the system is fixed. So if I pull a pint of fluid out, the pressure drops, you get lightheaded. So the way to solve that is to talk to your doctor about running an IV, put 500 milliliters of just thin, clean fluid in, then put the bag below the level of the heart, pull 480 to 500 milliliters of thick, old, tired blood out. The pressure will remain the same.
Okay.
The viscosity will change. So I see our clinical team do that a lot. Last thing I'll point out is at the bottom of your white blood cell count. This goes overlooked very often. These are in a specific order for a reason. Neutrophils, basophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, all these fancy names for white blood cells. You should see these numbers, like we do in you, be highest at the top. The next number should be lower. The next number should be lower than that, lower than that, lower than that, and eventually they should come to a 0. That V-shaped pattern is a very important pattern. It says how well-oriented your immune system is. We judge the strength of the immune system, amongst other things, by how it lines up and gets ready to fight. How many soldiers do I have on the field of battle waiting for the enemy to show up? Your front line of defense right here is your neutrophils. You have plenty of neutrophils. The numbers get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they go down to 0. As the numbers towards the bottom get elevated, it usually indicates some kind of chronic problem. Metals, mold, mycotoxin, viruses. Okay, that's when you want to make an inspection. You've got zeros at the bottom, that's a great sign. If you've got numbers at the bottom of your white blood cell count, talk to your doctor about digging into why you potentially have a chronic infection. You will find that lots of people that have viral infections are misdiagnosed with neurological conditions. It is very common for Parkinson's to be misdiagnosed when it can be a West Nile or a Lyme disease infection or another virus. It's well documented in the literature that the symptoms of a lot of neurological diseases parallel the symptoms of chronic viral conditions. So it's always good if you get diagnosed with something chronic to say, let's check for metals, mold, mycotoxins, and viruses. And let's just see if my body is not behaving properly because I have pathogenic invader. So I would always talk to your doctor before you accept any of those chronic diagnoses about looking into whether or not you have some underlying condition like viruses. Dude, overall, I got men your age that would kill to have these labs. Given your history that you disclosed to me on the podcast,
well, that makes me feel good.
You're doing really well, brother.
Thank you.
You're doing very well.
Thank you.
Okay. Last thing we'll do is look at these. Look at the genetic testing results that you have.
Oh boy.
This may come as a shock to you, but you have the motherfucker gene. So next time somebody calls you one, say, as a matter of fact, I am. These genes that are yellow, okay? When we look at genetic reports, they come out all kinds of different ways, but we generally want to see our genes green, which means neither the mom or dad passed the mutation on to us, passed that genetic predisposition. When they're yellow, it usually means that one parent gave us the gene mutation. When they're red, which you do not have, it means that both parents gave you the gene mutation. So in a nutshell, you have a genetic predisposition for three things. One, you have a genetic predisposition to be very poor at processing folic acid. You would be one of those people that would be really good to get folic acid out of your diet. This does not mean that you can't eat bread, pasta, cereal, grains. It means you have to eat the organic, non-fortified, non-enriched versions of those. Okay. So if you see fortified or enriched on the label, just get it out of the diet. This is the thing I warn a lot of parents about too. Just get fortified or enriched foods out of your kid's diet for 1 week. Watch what happens. You're going to be shocked at the behavioral changes. So what would this cause in you? Cause your intestinal motility to slow down. So intermittent gut issues that can't be explained by what you're eating. It also inhibits your ability to metabolize homocysteine, which is why your homocysteine is slightly risen. At the high end, you have a gene mutation called COMT, catechol-O-methyltransferase. This gene mutation makes it slow for you to break down catecholamines. You are absolutely one of those people, which probably 70% of your listeners, when your environment quiets, your mind wakes up. When you lay down and go to sleep at night, you have one of two types of sleep patterns. You either lay down tired and your mind keeps you awake and you have a hard time falling asleep, or you fall asleep and once you wake up at night, that's it. You sort of lay there just ruminating and you will think about the most innocuous nonsense. It will not be like a life-changing, earth-shattering thought. This is not like divorce, bankruptcy, financial ruin, change of business, career. It's none of those big life-changing events that should keep you awake. It's little innocuous nonsense. It just runs through your head. The best way to quiet that is with magnesium at night, 5-methylfolate at night, and there's a supplement called neuromedulla complex. Excellent for quieting those squirrels and just allowing your brain to calm down at night.
Okay.
Well,
Perfect.
But dude, I'm telling you, I got 42, 43-year-old men that would kill to have these labs.
Man,
So,
that makes me feel good. Thank you.
yeah, you're in good shape. And I hope that wasn't too much of a science lesson because a lot of times they're, especially like in presentations, they're like, don't talk about the science. Well, they say don't talk about science, religion, or politics, and I think
We're talking about all
talk
three.
about science, religion, and politics.
Man. Well, Gary, we're wrapping up the interview here. I know you got a flight to catch.
Yeah, this is amazing, man.
Man, I never go back and listen to my podcasts, and very few have I done that with, and I'll be listening to this probably several times just to remind myself to keep on the right track, and it's just so full of information. And,
Thank you.
And it was an honor to meet you and have you here, and I hope we remain friends.
Yeah. Oh, we're definitely going to remain friends. I mean, it was a real honor for me to be here too, man. I super appreciate you inviting me, having me on your show, exposing me to your audience. My intention was to add some value today, so I hope they got value out of it. But
We definitely got plenty.
I want to come back to the new studio too, brother.
Well, I'll invite you.
Built in the woods, and we can fire off some weapons.
Oh yeah, we'll have you out. We'll blow some shit up. And,
yes,
and it'll be a good time. Should be about 6 months, but we'll definitely keep in touch. And
for sure.
I'd love to have you back. So
thank you, Shawn.
thank you.
Appreciate you, brother.
You too.
Appreciate you.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.